Chapter 1086. Why is Qi Zixiao here? You even brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors? Su Qing was a little stunned. After being in charge of the Revolutionary Army for several years, Su Qing's appearance had not changed much, but he gave off a much calmer feeling. His body also carried a dignified aura, which was extraordinary at first glance. For Qi Zixiao to enter the Great Xia with such great fanfare, there must be something important. Could it be related to the Xia family? The Xia family had been in control of the world for hundreds of years and had a deep foundation. Maybe they had something that could attract her. Otherwise, even if something were to happen, there would be no need for her to bring 1,000 winged cavalry warriors with such great fanfare. After all, this isn't Dayo's territory, Suyu guessed. Su Qing's expression changed slightly. According to what Suyu said, it was not impossible. The 1,000 winged cavalry warriors were too conspicuous. Although he had an agreement with Dayo, that was all there was to it. It was in Dayo's interest for Great Xia to be in chaos. Now that they had the absolute advantage, it wasn't impossible for the Xia family to use some treasure to invite Qi Zixiao, allowing Dayo to intervene and bring the situation back to balance. It was also in Dayo's interest. But why did Qi Zixiao come here personally? After some thought, he looked at Qing Lian, wanting to hear what she had to say. Qi Zixiao is not someone who can be easily persuaded. Even if the Xia family has some treasures that could tempt her, she would not personally act. Qing Lian said bluntly. Su Qing nodded slightly. This was also something he could not understand. Perhaps the Xia family's treasure is too important. So you guessed. That's possible, but the probability is less than 3%. Qing Lian changed the topic and mentioned something else. Many things have happened in the Jianghu over the past 2 years. Many experts have banded together. Although many experts stayed outside the imperial court and fought on their own, both the imperial court and the volunteer army were paying attention to these experts. After all, the strength of these experts could already affect the situation of a battle to a certain extent, especially when it came to assassination. It was not impossible for them to take the head of a general among millions of soldiers. Therefore, both sides wanted to rope them in, but they also maintained vigilance against them, constantly paying attention to them. You mean the so-called go-home organization? In the past year, many experts had gone into hiding. Now, there were only a few people who were in the top 100 of the world's experts list. Qi Zixiao's visit had something to do with them? But how do you explain the 1,000 winged cavalry warriors? So you questioned. It was impossible for them not to pay attention to the organization at home. However, the crux of the matter now was that Qi Zixiao had brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors with her to Dayo. This was the reason why everyone was uneasy. After all, this was Great Xia and both sides were at war. 1,000 winged cavalry warriors could already affect the current situation, and everyone couldn't help but guess the reason behind it. Qi Zixiao is one of the leaders of the Go Home organization. The main purpose is to deal with the so-called foreign races. The disappearance of those experts is related to this. Qi Zixiao's appearance here is 70% likely related to this as well. Qing Lian pursed her lips and smiled lightly. Her smile was filled with strong confidence. You know a lot about it? Su Qing's pupils shrank. He didn't know much about that organization. However, Qing Lian seemed to understand it very well. I do, but it has nothing to do with your great cause, Qing Lian said casually. What's the point of thinking so much? Just ask him directly. Su Qing tapped his fingers on the tea table beside him and pondered for a moment. With Qi Zixiao's temperament, she would disdain to lie. It was indeed the most suitable to send someone to inquire directly. He might be able to deduce something from her words. Who should we send? If his status was too low, he would not be able to see Qi Zixiao. Those with high status have their own duties. I'll go. I'm also a little curious. Qing Lian stood up and said, Tell everyone not to act rashly first. Su Qing nodded. Naturally, he didn't want to anger Qi Zixiao. While Su Qing and the others were guessing, the imperial court of Great Xia was doing the same. The new emperor of Great Xia had been in office for several years. Great Xia was in a precarious situation and was on the verge of collapse. The new emperor couldn't sleep at night, had white hair, and was no longer in high spirits. The biggest mistake he made after ascending to the throne was to attack Dayo again. If not for this, the situation wouldn't have deteriorated so rapidly, and Great Xia wouldn't have been completely hollowed out and unable to suppress the four sides. For the past few years, the imperial court had thought of giving up the etiquette and seeking help from the outside world. However, the Qin nation was separated by the Yun nation, which was a corner of Dayo. As for the people sent to Dayo, most of them were intercepted and killed by the experts in the Revolutionary Army. Occasionally 2 of them broke through, but they didn't get to see Qi Xiao. They didn't even get to see her face, let alone move her. However, even though the imperial court's strength had been greatly reduced and they were besieged in a corner, their eyes and ears weren't completely cut off. They had also found out that Qi Xiao had brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors into Great Xia. Although the chances weren't high, they still wanted to try their best. At this time, Renbaqian and the Empress were boating on the river. It was a clear and slanting rain, green mountains and clear waters. Boating on the river was naturally a carefree experience that couldn't be enjoyed in the palace. The rolling waters of the Yangtze River wash away all heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure, vanish in the blink of an eye. How many things since ancient times have become a joke? Renbaqian stood at the bow of the boat and softly recited, "Good poem." Lin Dong tapped his palm with his fan and praised, "This poem is good, but it's tragic and stirring. Zhao Prince Consort is going to do great things, so this poem isn't suitable." Renbaqian had a majestic figure and a fierce look on his face. He stood there and pretended to be a romantic scholar. After hearing Lin Dong's words, he beamed with joy. He had long wanted to show off like this. He always felt that it was very pretentious. Renbaqian then waved his hand and said, "I had a sudden feeling, I was just bragging." Lin Dong immediately laughed and felt that Zhao Prince Consort was really interesting. The Empress sat at the stern of the boat with one hand supporting her chin. She was so angry that she almost laughed when she saw Renbaqian's behavior. He was really shameless. As the river surged, the water splashed into the boat. Renbaqian looked down at the water stains in the boat and then at the waterline, which almost reached the edge of the boat. He was deep in thought. Who is the one who is too heavy? Lin Dong smiled and shook his head. He turned around, cupped his hands and said, "I won't disturb the 2 of you anymore." His figure flashed and he landed on the surface of the river. Step by step he walked toward the shore. It was indeed a graceful sight. Renbaqian felt that Lin Dong was much more successful in showing off than him. If he jumped, he would have to call for help. However, as soon as Lin Dong walked away, the waterline immediately dropped a lot. Renbaqian sighed and said, "There is indeed one more person." The Empress sneered. "This boat could carry 4 to 5 people, but 3 people almost capsized. Don't you know who is heavier?" Now that Renbaqian's weight had increased to 150 kilograms like a balloon, one person was equivalent to 2 people. Renbaqian patted the air, and the boat immediately shot forward like an arrow. In just a moment they could see the city wall in the distance. The 2 of them entered the city and toured the scenery. One looked fierce and the other was full of heroic spirit. They couldn't be considered an immortal couple, but they were still eye-catching. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1087. Chang'an City was an important city in Great Xia, and the waterways weren't closed. Renbaqian and the Empress entered the city on a boat, but the winged cavalry were stopped outside the city. Even after receiving Su Qing's order, the city guards did not dare to casually let the winged cavalry into the city. The city gates were closed and the city walls were heavily guarded. However, this was just for show. There were 1,000 winged cavalry warriors, and each of them had the ability to climb up the city walls. The city guards definitely wouldn't be able to resist them. Which one of you is the leader? This is the Grand Xia. What business do you have here? The guard was surnamed Wangji, and was a disciple of a large clan. As early as a few years ago, when the Revolutionary Army swept through the lands and Great Xia was in a state of decline, the descendants of various clans had already joined the Revolutionary Army. Betting on both sides was a way for aristocratic families to protect themselves. The leader of the winged cavalry was called Ho Dajiang and was 1 step away from becoming a cardinal heaven expert. He was even stronger than Gong Zheng from back then. He pushed the sheep forward and said, "Do you think the city wall can stop us? Open the door, we'll leave after buying some food in the city." The 1,000 winged cavalry warriors consumed a lot of rations every day. Even though they brought along some meat when they set off, most of it was the Empress's rations. These rations still had to be prepared in Great Xia. Seeing that the other party had no intention of attacking the city, Wang Ji's expression changed. He knew that if he really angered the other party, the city walls would indeed fall. He could still hold his ground against other people, but he did not dare to face these barbarians. The strong feared the unreasonable, and these barbarians were not just ordinarily unreasonable. If you dare to be unreasonable with them, they will dare to take your life. Moreover, there were orders from the higher-ups. He immediately raised his voice and said, "There are too many of you. If all of you enter the city, it will definitely cause chaos in the city. Only 100 people can enter. Leave the city immediately after you buy it and don't cause any trouble." Ho Dajiang sneered. "You talk too much. What do I need you to say? Hurry up and open the city gates. Otherwise I'll break the city and kill your entire family." Wang Ji's complexion was rather unsightly. He had already intended to retreat, but his opponent was not giving him any leeway at all. He was filled with regret. If he had known earlier, he would have ignored them from the start. Wang Ji's expression changed several times before he commanded, "Open the door." After he finished speaking, he turned around and left, not bothering with them anymore. In any case, the higher-ups had already instructed him not to take any responsibility. Ho Dajiang smiled contemptuously. This group of people from Great Xia was really weak. Soon after, the winged cavalry entered the city in a single file and went to look for grain stores in the city to purchase rations, causing a huge commotion. A group of men weighing more than 150 kilograms rushed into the shops with long swords in their hands. Those who did not know would have thought that they were robbers. Those who knew would know that they were robbers. A grain worth a few hundred taels of silver was easily snatched away by just throwing a few pieces of silver. Previously, Rinpoche had asked them to pay when they were due. However, from their point of view, they had already paid. At the very least, they didn't take the money from the grain stores and even gave them money. Not only did they not pay less, but they also paid a lot more. Rinpoche and the Empress were on the boat and naturally noticed the commotion caused by the winged cavalry entering the city. However, they didn't say much. The Empress didn't care, and Rinpoche couldn't be bothered to talk about it. All his attention was on the livelihood of the people in the city. It could be seen that these peasants were doing a good job. The lives of the commoners were not greatly affected. Moreover, with the sweet potatoes, although the people in the city were not considered wealthy, they could still fill their stomachs and live a stable life. This could be seen from the words and actions of the commoners on both sides of the street. The boat crossed a stone bridge. The commotion caused by the winged cavalry hadn't affected this place yet, and the two of them saw something interesting. On the street, two men were facing each other with swords in their hands. One of them was wearing a bamboo hat, and the other was wearing a scholar's green robe. It looked like a duel, and there were many commoners watching the show. The two of them did not know how long they had been standing there. The boat was about to pass by them, but they were still staring at each other. Those who didn't know would think that they were competing with each other's aura. Rinpoche didn't see the excitement, so he dug out a piece of wood from the boat. With a flick of his hand, it flew toward the two of them. Ouch! Someone in the crowd cried out in pain. He was a few meters away from the two of them. The Empress immediately revealed a mocking expression. "Go ahead if you can." Rinpoche didn't know the accuracy of the Empress's hidden weapon back then, but how could he not know now? He immediately raised his eyebrows in provocation. "No eyebrows." The Empress smiled faintly. She pinched her fingers on the boat, and a fingernail-sized piece of wood appeared in her hand. She then flicked it toward the two of them. Ouch! This time, a cry of pain came from the other side of the crowd. It was even more crooked than Rinpoche's. Following which, the two of them exchanged blows with each other, and the cries of pain could be heard incessantly from the crowd. In no time, all the onlookers had run away, leaving only the two suspected swordsmen there. Their expressions kept changing, and they didn't know what exactly was going on. "Forget it. Her Majesty and I are evenly matched, and we won't be able to tell who is better even if we compete for a while longer." Rinpoche waved his hand. The two of them were really bored. Two great experts competing to see who could throw the projectile more crookedly was a joke to outsiders. Rinpoche felt that compared to those two swordsmen, he was indeed an expert on the same level as the Empress. Not long after, the two of them went ashore and toured around the city for a while. Then they left the north of the city and met up with the winged cavalry. They brought along a large amount of purchased supplies and continued north. After another 3 days, Qing Lian came to visit. "Your Highness, long time no see. I didn't expect Her Majesty and Her Highness to personally come here. May I know what's the matter? Perhaps I can be of some help." Qing Lian smiled when she saw Rinpoche. "Are you here to inquire about the news?" Rinpoche asked with a chuckle. "That's right. Her Majesty brought the winged cavalry here, and many people are restless," Qing Lian said calmly. She had always been calm when talking to Rinpoche. She had stayed at Black Bamboo Academy for a few months and knew Rinpoche's temperament. It was better to be calm than to beat around the bush. "Don't worry. It has nothing to do with you. I'm just borrowing the way." Rinpoche tried to put Qing Lian at ease. Are you going to the area occupied by the imperial court? Qing Lian asked thoughtfully. You are quick to react. Ren Baqin immediately laughed. He had always admired Qing Lian. Is there anything we can do to help? Qing Lian asked directly. Although it's not in our territory, there are still some people we can mobilize. There's no need. You don't have to think too much, Ren Baqin said bluntly. Qing Lian then smiled and said, I'm not worried, but I reckon that many people will be restless if you go to the imperial court. It's useless even if I explain. Ren Baqin didn't care about what others thought. They had already packaged Dayo for him and he couldn't be bothered to accept it. Why would he care about what others thought? Wasn't this the reason why the Empress brought the winged cavalry here? Qing Lian talked about other things and then gave Ren Baqin a map. It was a detailed map of Great Xia. Ren Baqin couldn't even get his hands on such a map, but Qing Lian gave it to him just like that. This greatly improved his impression of her. In fact, Qing Lian had already guessed what Ren Baqin and the Empress were here for. However, there were some things that she couldn't say. As long as it was as she thought, it had nothing to do with the Revolutionary Army or the Imperial Court. As for the fact that the Empress of Dayo brought the winged cavalry across the border, both the Revolutionary Army and the Imperial Court could only turn a blind eye to it. Even so, the Revolutionary Army still sent people to secretly follow them for the rest of the journey. It wasn't only them. Even some experts followed behind them to find out their purpose. The group of people followed them all the way to the border between the Revolutionary Army and the Imperial Court. Baidu search 081 Chinese Network Yen. No advertising slogans. Chapter 1088. Zihu Road was the front line of the confrontation between the Imperial Court and the Volunteer Army, and it was one of the most important towns in the hands of the Imperial Court. A young man in embroidered clothes was sitting in a residence in the city, listening to the reports from the people around him. In another hour they will enter the city. The person who spoke had a cold and sharp voice. He was thin, had a fair face and had no facial hair. Although he tried to speak gently, he still gave off a sinister feeling. I understand. I'll go and invite granduncle, the man said. After they left, the man sighed. A few years ago, Great Xia was still in its heyday, but it had fallen to such a state a few years later. Qi Zixia was running amok in Great Xia with her army, and he and the others had to think of ways to persuade her. All of this stemmed from the repeated attacks on Dayo in the past, which resulted in repeated losses. Otherwise, the Xia family would have at least 100 years of luck. The man was called Xia Chuyang, and he was the son of the current King Liang, Xia Bailong. The person he wanted to invite was also called granduncle by Xia Bailong. He was the strongest spirit wheel expert in the imperial family. 100 years ago, he had made a name for himself and was ranked in the top 50 of the world's most powerful experts. Later he disappeared because of an incident. Many people thought he was dead, and even the princes didn't know of his existence. Now that Great Xia was about to collapse, he had to come out of seclusion to suppress the situation and the many people in the capital. 100 years ago he was already in the top 50 of the world's most powerful expert. Now he had improved further and his strength was astonishing. No one knew to what extent, but after he came out of seclusion he only went to a few places to suppress the turbulent capital. Many people guessed that he had already taken that step. This was also the source of the imperial family's confidence. In order to reach an agreement with Qi Zixiao, they specially came here to wait. Ren Baqin held Hua's hand and strolled along the long street with the empress. Although this was an important town at the front line and the whole city was filled with uneasiness and tension, they could still feel the prosperity of this place. There were countless shops on both sides of the street, and merchants and travelers came and went. They finally felt a little of the prosperity of Great Xia in the past. The reason why the winged cavalry would enter the city within 2 hours was so that they wouldn't ruin the scenery of the city and disturb the family of 3 strolling around. Both sides of the long street were filled with ancient green trees, and the trees were covered with white flowers. A gust of wind blew past and countless flower petals scattered down. It was as if this was not a part of the mortal world, and it was the beautiful scenery of this city. Ren Baqin and the empress were enjoying the scenery while Hua was busy stuffing the flying petals into her mouth. From time to time she would stuff a petal into Ren Baqin's palm. Using the voice of a young girl she said, "Delicious sweet, try it, father." No matter how preoccupied the passers-by were, when they saw such a warm and childlike scene, they all smiled knowingly. If Honeysuckle was a little younger and didn't look like he was 8 or 9 years old, and his body wasn't a lot wider than others, it would be more fitting for the current situation. "It's delicious. Father, try it." Hua stuffed a flying bug into Rinpoche's hand. It's delicious. Father, try it. Hua grabbed another caterpillar from the tree trunk. Seeing that the things that Hua gave him were getting more and more bizarre, Rinpoche smiled helplessly and said, I'm not hungry. Mother, eat. Hua turned her head and looked at the Empress expectantly. She stretched out her hand and held it tightly, afraid that the things in her hand would run away. These things were strange in Rinpoche's eyes, but to her they were the best things in the world. Naturally, she wanted to share them with her father and mother. Even someone as cold as the Empress felt a little helpless. With a smile on her face, she took a caterpillar that was the size of a pinky finger, had a back full of spikes, and had a black and red body. She threw it into her mouth. Then she raised her eyebrows and said with some surprise, It tastes pretty good. It's delicious. Hua smiled even more brilliantly after receiving praise. Rinpoche raised his head and looked at the people standing in front of him. Were they here to look for him? Xia Qiang greets Fairy Qi and Mr. Ren. The young man at the front raised his voice. He didn't mention their identities and didn't mention his own. He only addressed them as Mr. Fairy. Rinpoche's eyes moved slightly as he knew the other party's identity. He whispered, It's Great Xia's King Liang. Otherwise, the Empress wouldn't have known who the other party was. However, everyone's ears and eyes were sharp, so they naturally heard it clearly. The Empress didn't respond. Instead, she looked at the tall man behind Xia Qiang, who was about 50 years old. She was slightly surprised that the Xia family actually had such a person. This was somewhat unexpected. Why don't we go upstairs and talk? Xia Qiang smiled warmly when he saw the Empress's gaze. Let's talk if you can take 3 moves from me. If you can't, there's no need to talk. The Empress's mind was firmly locked on the tall man. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised, and she seemed to be in a good mood. She didn't expect to find an expert from the heaven and earth region to test her skills. Xia Qiang smiled. It was good that they could talk. As for 3 moves, he didn't expect Qi Zixiao to be so careless. With his granduncle's strength, it was hard to say who would take 3 moves from whom. An ordinary spirit will expert couldn't even take 1 move from him. The tall man was also full of fighting spirit as he said, In that case, let's talk after we fight. However, if we go all out, this place will be destroyed. It's better to go outside the city. Xia Qiang was a little surprised. He didn't expect his granduncle to say such words. Furthermore, his tone was completely like that of a peer. Could it be that Qi Zixiao could also reach that level? How old was Qi Zixiao? All right. The Empress carried Hua in one hand and Rinpoche in the other. In a few flashes she arrived outside the city. During this time she only took a few steps in the air. It was as if there was something invisible under her feet that she could use as leverage. She didn't touch the ground at all. Could she fly after reaching the longevity heaven stage? This thought suddenly popped up in his mind. He thought about it carefully. Although he didn't know much about it, judging from the Empress's performance, she probably hadn't reached this level yet. It should be the longevity Empress who used some kind of technique to achieve this effect within a short distance. The Empress left the 2 of them there and moved her feet to appear thousands of meters away. She stood with her hands behind her back and looked straight at the tall man who landed not far in front of her. King Liang and the other 2 people were on the city wall, staring down. Apart from King Liang, the other 2 were spirit will experts. They were also nervously watching the fight between the 2 of them. They might be able to learn something from watching a fight of this level. I didn't expect there to be someone like you in the Xia family. Who are you? The Empress asked instead of rushing to attack. Xia Yonghe, the tall man said. His aura surged and the air around him began to distort. Long weapons rose from the ground, and in the blink of an eye, the area within 100 meters of him was filled with long spears that emitted murderous intent. As the name suggested, it was to open up a world and form a domain that was under one's control. It could be used to fight against enemies and greatly increase one's strength. Rinpoche was a little surprised when he saw this scene from afar. All along there had been no detailed information about the opening of the heaven and earth domain, especially in Deyo. Therefore he didn't know what kind of situation the heaven and earth domain would be like. Looking at the scene in front of him, he felt as if his spirit was projected into reality and could affect reality even more than the materialization of a heaven-grade weapon. If he guessed correctly, those countless long spears were probably real. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1089. In the face of Xia Yonghe's domain, the Empress moved her feet and appeared in the domain. The spears that she collided with shattered one after another. She raised her hand and threw a punch. It was a simple punch. Her fist was spotlessly white and looked like it was made of colored glass. It was extremely slow and heavy. Even Rinpoche, who was thousands of meters away, felt his mind being sucked by this punch. This is the real strength of the Empress after her breakthrough, Rinpoche thought to himself. It seemed like the Empress had used her physical strength to increase her strength during the test. This punch was completely incomparable to the one she used during the test. In the face of this punch, Xia Yonghe felt that this incomparably heavy punch seemed to have sucked his mind into it. Heaven and earth, Qi Zixiao and everything else around him disappeared. All he could see was that incomparably clear punch that was filled with boundless power. Xia Yonghe didn't move. All the spears around him formed a black dragon in front of him. The dragon's head was in front of him, and its body was swung toward the sky. It was as if a dragon was lowering its head and extending its claws to press down. The fist and the black dragon's claws met. There was no sound. Instead, there was an invisible rebounding force that spread outward from the point of contact. The surrounding vegetation was swept away, and the broken grass, leaves and branches formed a ring in the air that spread outward. Rinpoche's eyes flashed with astonishment. This world's martial arts had indeed exceeded his understanding. The Empress's gaze began to change. Her eyes were filled with a sense of distance and simplicity. Once again she punched out. This time her fist was no longer pure white. Instead it had turned red. Tiny red runes with sparkling and translucent radiance covered her fist. If one didn't look closely, her fist would look like a ruby. Xia Yonghe's expression changed slightly. This punch gave him a completely different feeling from the previous one. He smelled an ancient and savage scent from this punch. He seemed to see the tribe killing ferocious beasts and sacrificing the fattest prey to the heavens. He seemed to see the tribe fighting with the ferocious beasts in order to survive. He saw the ferocious beasts letting out their final roars as their flesh and blood splattered in all directions. Xia Yonghe raised his hands and the black dragon in the air struck out 3 times. Each strike produced a roar, the ground trembled and cracks spread thousands of meters from his feet. After the 3rd strike, Xia Yonghe's face turned pale. At this moment the Empress punched out again. Not only was her fist red, but the skin all over her body was also red. Behind her, a 10-meter-tall shadow appeared. It was blurry and indistinct, but one could barely make out the shape of a human. However, the savage aura on this human figure was even heavier. A fierce and barbaric aura directly pressed down on the hearts of everyone who saw this figure, causing fear to rise in their hearts. Even Rinpoche was affected. It was as if he had seen an ancient savage traversing the river of time and appearing in the world. What is this? Who is this? Rinpoche thought to himself. What a frightening aura. Even though the other party's figure was illusory and indistinct, Lin Fan could feel the tyrannical aura emanating from the other party. This aura was thousands of times stronger than that of the ancient race. Why would the longevity heavenly empress undergo such a transformation? Was it related to the divine soul like the creation of the heaven and earth region? That's not right. Although I don't know much, I can sense that it's not the soul. It seems to be something deeper. As for Hua, she looked at the figure behind the empress with a look of yearning. That kind of tyrannical aura wasn't a deterrent to her, but a goal. As the empress punched out, Xia Yonghe's face turned pale. The black dragon roared at the sky and charged toward the empress. Both parties were in a stalemate for a moment. The black dragon was covered in cracks from head to toe. Following which, it turned into fragments that filled the sky and flew into Xia Yonghe's forehead. Xia Yonghe flew backward and landed on the ground. His face was as white as a sheet of paper, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. The figure behind the empress dissipated, and the red talisman fused into her skin. She said faintly, "You can't even take 3 of my punches. Go back and don't appear in front of me again." In 2 flashes she appeared in front of Rinpoche and disappeared with him. A moment later the 3 of them appeared on another street. The empress put the 2 of them down and said, "I didn't expect the Xia family to have such experts. It seems like they won't die anytime soon." Rinpoche had a lot of questions in his mind. He turned his head and looked at the empress. She stood there like a real fairy, and her whole body was full of an otherworldly aura. One had to know that those were experts who opened up the heaven and earth region. Including the empress, there were currently only 3 people known to be alive. They couldn't even take 3 of her punches. After witnessing that scene and looking at the current empress, she really looked like an immortal. It would be even better if she didn't have a nosebleed. Rinpoche took out a piece of cloth from somewhere and handed it to the empress. "Wipe it." The empress didn't take the cloth from Rinpoche's hand. She sniffed and sucked the blood back, not willing to waste a single drop. Ren Baqian felt that this action was like sniffing snot. Her previous outstanding style was completely gone now. Is he injured? Ren Baqian couldn't help but ask. It will take some effort to seriously injure him in 3 moves, the Empress said simply. He has also reached this stage. If he goes to the Emperor's tomb, he might get into trouble. Now he will need at least a few months to recover, the Empress added. Ren Baqian nodded. No wonder the Empress was like this the moment they met. That's good too. With such an expert in the Xia family, they won't die anytime soon. If they really make an irresistible offer, it will be troublesome. It's better to let them fight. Ren Baqian laughed. Then he said with some regret, it's a pity for Qing Lian. If they were done fighting, maybe Qing Lian would come to Deyo for shelter. But now it seemed that the war in Great Xia wouldn't stop in a short period of time. I have to remind Su Qing and the rest to hide their whereabouts, lest they get wiped out by Xia Yonghe, Ren Baqian said after thinking for a while. Your Majesty, what was that behind you just now? Ren Baqian finally asked the question in his heart. It should be something like a bloodline imprint. The Empress said, it's an ancestral imprint that is passed down through the bloodline. When one reaches a certain level, he will be able to sense a trace of the ancestral imprint. So mysterious? Ren Baqian raised his eyebrows. However, thinking about it, the spirit, heaven-grade weapons, and the heaven and earth region were also very mysterious. This world seemed to be much more profound in this aspect than he had imagined. It's just a trace of imprint. According to my guess, it should be something that is purified from the bloodline after it has been refined to a certain level. It seems like it can reduce the number of detours. It seems? The scholar lives and the mimic dies, the Empress said simply. Ren Baqian immediately understood. Although awakening such a bloodline imprint could reduce the number of detours, it was also easy to be affected. Does everyone have it? Ren Baqian suddenly asked. I don't know. There are very few records about this. I only understood it after I reached this stage, the Empress said faintly. First, set a small goal, for example 1 second. Chapter 1090. In the depths of the palace in Great Xia, a man's angry voice was heard. How dare Qi Zixiao? Brother, although she refused, the rebels have slowed down their attacks, Xia Chuyang said from below. They are afraid of you and are afraid of a life-and-death struggle. Emperor Xia snorted. We've achieved our goal, haven't we? Xia Chuyang said with a smile. As long as the rebels slowed down their attacks, the imperial court would recover after 2 to 3 years of recuperation. Although the imperial court only controlled 1/3 of the area, it was the most prosperous and affluent. As long as it recovered, there would be a chance of victory. It's a pity that you are greatly restricted. Otherwise, you could have killed all the rebel leaders and disintegrated them in an instant. Emperor Xia's eyes flickered. Otherwise, the first thing he would have done after he came out of seclusion was to ask him to eliminate the rebel leaders instead of suppressing the capital. If it weren't for those aristocratic families. Emperor Xia's face became gloomy again. If it weren't for them, he would have abandoned the prefectures in the south and allowed the bandits to invade. He would have lured them to the imperial city and gotten rid of them. Jiutong Mountain was a majestic mountain with overlapping peaks and winding paths. Looking from afar, the mountain peak was surrounded by clouds, which made it look even more magnificent. Ren Baqian walked on the mountain with Erhua in tow. From time to time he would receive treasures from her, some strange bugs. Fortunately, Erhua had learned from her mistakes and recognized some stinky or unpalatable bugs. Now, the ones that she found tasty were the ones that tasted good. The mountain path was difficult, but it wasn't an obstacle for them as if they were walking on flat ground. If it weren't for Erhua running around, they would have been faster. Along the way, Erhua was quite liked by Lin Dong. She wore a string of jade pendants, jade talismans, and antiques that jingled as she walked. Ren Baqian estimated that the things on Erhua were worth at least hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. It had to be said that Jingtian sect was indeed wealthy after thousands of years of inheritance. After walking on the mountain for 2 days, they saw a camp set up at the entrance of a valley. The valley was densely covered with colorful miasma. Li Yuanzhu and Lin Xiaola, as well as the higher-ups of Jingtian sect, stayed here. Upon seeing the Empress, Li Yuanzhu's gaze froze. She then smiled and said, "Congratulations, fellow Daoist Qi." Even with Li Yuanzhu's calmness, she couldn't help but feel a little distracted when she sensed the Empress's breakthrough. The Empress nodded her head slightly and felt very happy. He had been ranked below her for so many years. Although part of it was due to him suppressing his strength, it was impossible for him not to have any thoughts about it. Now that he had broken through, when he looked back, the other party was already far behind him. His thoughts were clear and he felt rather carefree. The little bit of unhappiness he felt in the past had also vanished. The tomb is within the valley and it is covered with poisonous miasma. Medicine will not be able to cure it. Every day there will be 4 hours before and after noon for the miasma to subside. After today we will rest for a day and continue to explore Decan's tomb tomorrow. Lin Dong said. The Empress had no objections. Get rid of those bugs that are following us, the Empress instructed the winged cavalry. Focus on driving them away, Ren Baqian added. He then pulled Hua over and warned her not to run into the valley. He also instructed a few guards to keep an eye on her. The winged cavalry was also divided into 2 groups. One group drove away the martial artists that were following them and went hunting. The other group inquired about the situation in the valley and set up camp here after knowing that this was the only path. Everyone rested for a night. The next day the poisonous miasma in the valley gradually dissipated, and some people entered the valley. Although there was still poison, it was no longer a problem for everyone. The valley was winding, filled with strange stones and poisonous bugs. The trees on both sides were covered with pink flowers. If there was no poisonous miasma, it would be considered a beautiful scene. There was a road in the valley that was barren. After walking along the road for less than 15 minutes, they saw a poisonous pool. The water in the pool was dark green and lifeless. Nearby there were dozens of white bones scattered in all directions. It seemed like they belonged to people who had been here before. The poisonous miasma is formed by the poisonous pool and the miasma after the flowers in the valley rot. Even if a spirit wheel expert were to fall into it for less than 45 minutes, his spirit would be infected like maggots in the tarsal bones. Lin Dong explained as he walked, afraid that the Empress would be careless. Although the Empress had already taken this step, the poisonous miasma in the valley was too difficult to deal with, and no one knew if she would be affected. It can even corrode the spirit? Rinpoche was quite surprised. One had to know that the spirit belonged to the category of consciousness and was considered an illusory thing. How could the poison here be so powerful? Exactly. There are many strange things in the world. Lin Dong looked serious. Rinpoche was deep in thought. It seemed like the poisonous miasma here was worth studying. One had to know that the effect of poison on spirit wheel experts was very small. Large doses of poison over a long period of time were needed to achieve the same effect on ordinary people. Spirit wheel experts who weren't strong enough weren't fools. If they weren't captured alive, they wouldn't be able to do it. If the poisonous miasma here could be studied, it might be useful in the future. Of course, this was just a preliminary idea. A spirit wheel expert could stay in the miasma for 45 minutes. In other words, the toxicity wasn't enough to threaten an expert. It was just a little strange. If the concentration was increased and injected into the body of an expert, the effect might be better. After turning around the poisonous pool, a wordless stone tablet stood in front of them. It was 3 feet tall and 4 feet wide. We can't go past this point. No matter where we go, we will come back. Li Yuanzhu nodded at the Empress, closed her eyes and stepped forward. White mist rose behind the stone tablet. However, the white mist was confined to this small area, and it was impossible to see what was inside. After taking 2 steps, Li Yuanzhu's figure couldn't be seen from the outside. However, after a while, everyone saw her come out of the white mist with her eyes closed. Rinpoche narrowed his eyes and saw that the position she was standing in was exactly the same as when she entered. It was just that she was facing the opposite direction. Li Yuanzhu opened her eyes and said, "This place is strange. My senses are completely restricted to my body and can't be released at all. Walking in it is like walking in water and you will be pressured by the surroundings. An ordinary earth wheel expert can only walk 3 times. I'll try." The Empress stepped forward after saying this. After taking a step, she felt as if she had entered something. The surrounding air was condensed and squeezed toward her. However, this kind of pressure had no effect on the Empress. She closed her eyes and felt her surroundings. Sure enough, she couldn't feel anything. Even Rinpoche and the others who were 1 step away couldn't feel anything. Furthermore, her senses couldn't be released at all. She couldn't see anything in front of her and couldn't hear anything in front of her. The Empress curled her lips and felt that this was interesting. She closed her eyes and took a few more steps. Every step she took seemed to shrink the ground to an inch. Suddenly, she felt as if she had stepped into a bustling city from a quiet and uninhabited mountain. The sounds of people, the wind, and the vegetation all entered her ears. A familiar aura also appeared in front of her. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 1091. It wasn't unexpected for the Empress to come back after entering the fog. Before anyone could say anything, the Empress took another step back into the fog, turned sideways and threw a punch. If they were outside, this punch would be able to destroy the ground in a radius of several hundred meters in the air. However, the immense power dissipated in the air that was as viscous as water as soon as the Empress punched out. The Empress carefully sensed and could feel some fluctuations, like a stone thrown into the water, splashing out circles of ripples. She was testing the waters. However, to the Empress's surprise, the ripples caused by this punch spread in all directions. The ripples were chaotic, cancelled out each other, or staggered. She couldn't feel the real situation in her surroundings at all. The Empress exerted force with her feet, trying to create a crack to go forward. However, the force transmitted through the tip of her foot into the ground, and there was no movement at all. This wasn't unexpected. Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, and the others must have already tried these methods. If they were effective, they wouldn't be the ones to try them. Afterward, the Empress's body was covered with runes, and her aura rose steadily. However, the huge aura stopped spreading when it was 1 meter away from her body. However, the Empress didn't care. There were indeed some methods to limit power here. In her mind, the upper limit was the spirit wheel or cardinal heaven level. As long as this limit was exceeded, it could be broken. After all, this was left behind by the human emperor, and the highest the human race could reach in this world was longevity heaven and earth. After reaching this level, they couldn't advance any further. Therefore, the limit could only be here. Once it was exceeded, no one could break it, and whatever the human emperor left behind would be meaningless. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that this was simply a tomb that didn't want anyone to enter at all. However, whether it was the Empress, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, Rinpoche, or the others, they didn't believe this was the case. Even ordinary human race experts had left behind a backup plan like the Temple of Heaven. Even though there were foreign races mixed in, and the Temple of Heaven had deviated from its original purpose for thousands of years, it was still a backup plan left behind by some experts for the human race. How could someone who was called the human emperor not leave behind something? How could he not hope for his descendants to return to the land where they were born, raised, and died? The land that was stained red with the blood of the human race? The tomb must contain the remains of a human emperor, so it must be opened by a descendant of the human clan. The Empress's entire body was blood red, and a gigantic figure appeared behind her. The Empress wanted to use brute force to break open this place. As the blood essence surged throughout his body, drop after drop of blood essence exploded within his body. The immense power contained within the blood essence poured into every cell in his body. It was like eating a Snickers bar. The Empress ferociously punched the air in front of her. The air didn't explode, and the smoke-like fog didn't sweep along with the wind generated by the punch. However, there was a slight caw sound in the air. It was as if this punch didn't hit the air, but hit something solid instead. Open. The Empress punched again. She even heard the sound of something cracking. Open for me, the Empress shouted coldly. Her strength was still as ferocious as ever. With this punch, the air was filled with cracks as if it was a solid object. The cracks were fine and dense, extending to every corner of the fog. With a crisp sound, the fog immediately shattered like glass. The Empress's huge blood essence also rushed into the sky. If the blood essence of an ordinary spirit wheel expert was a small stream, then the Empress's blood essence was a surging river. This shocked Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, and the people from Jingtian sect. All the winged cavalry warriors who entered the valley looked at her with reverence. The fragments of the fog in the air fell to the ground and turned into real fog. They were absorbed into the stone wall in front of them and formed a door of fog. This change was beyond everyone's expectations, and they looked up one after another. Rinpoche's eyes flickered. He originally listened to Li Yuanzhu and was prepared to use robots to explore the way. Now it seemed that using robots wouldn't work. Someone had to truly reach the realm of longevity heaven or heaven and earth. Otherwise, this maze wouldn't be broken, and the subsequent changes wouldn't happen. Although it was a door of fog formed by the fog on the stone wall, everyone believed that they would definitely be able to pass through it. Without this door, it would probably be extremely difficult to enter the tomb of the human emperor. Thousands of years ago, the ancestors of the human race had various skills, power, and understanding of this world far beyond what they had now. Just like the method of putting memories into the consciousness of others in the ancient tomb under the palace, no one knew how it was done. The Empress restrained her blood essence, put her hands behind her back, and walked to the door of fog to take a closer look. Just as Rinpoche was about to step forward, he realized that there seemed to be some changes to the wordless stone tablet. There are changes to the stone tablet. Rinpoche called out. The Empress, Li Yuanzhu and Lin Dong came to the front of the stone tablet to take a look. Lines of words appeared from top to bottom. They were the words of Great Xia. The descendants of the human race are here. Kowtow 9 times and call their names 3 times. The fog will open and the door will appear. The corner of Rinpoche's mouth twitched, and he turned to look at Lin Dong and Li Yuanzhu. He saw that the two of them were in a daze after glancing at each other. Then they looked away with baffled expressions and walked to the front of the stone door. The fog had been opened and the door had appeared. What was the point of showing this thing? You showed it before. Although the two of them didn't know how to kowtow, there were so many people in Jingtian sect that they could just line up to kowtow. Could it be that these words will appear during the poisonous miasma? Rinpoche guessed, feeling inexplicably amused. That should be the case. Lin Dong nodded. If you can enter this place during the period of the poisonous miasma, you will see these words. When the poisonous miasma disperses, the words on it will also disperse. This is another way to enter, but I don't know where the cure for the poisonous miasma is hidden. Chief Lin, didn't you say that a spirit wheel expert can last here for 45 minutes? Didn't you guys come over and try? Rinpoche smiled faintly. I came in but I didn't come here. During the poisonous miasma, there are other changes in this valley. It's not easy even for a spirit wheel expert to reach here. If you are not careful, you won't have the chance to return. Even if you manage to escape, your spirit will be damaged. Lin Dong shook his head slightly. When everyone arrived in front of the door, the Empress pressed her hand on it. Her palm slowly passed through the door and entered half of her arm. It can go through, the Empress said faintly. This was expected, but everyone also found it strange. After all, when the fog dispersed, everyone could see that this place was the same stone wall as other places. However, this door could actually go through and they didn't know where it led to. This should be related to space, right? Rinpoche was very surprised. Then he followed the Empress and stepped into the door. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 1092. No one knew if there were any dangers behind the Yun Gate, but the Empress was confident in her own strength. Rinpoche followed closely behind, but someone grabbed his collar. Li Yuanzhu retracted her 2 jade-like fingers, glanced at Rinpoche with a faint smile and followed behind the Empress. Next was Lin Dong. Rinpoche looked to his left and right again. Seeing that no one was competing with him, he snorted and followed after them. He felt that he was being discriminated against. So what if you're a spirit wheel expert? Do weaklings have no human rights? With this resentment in mind, Rinpoche turned around and instructed the others to retreat out of the valley if they didn't come out when the time was up. When he stepped into the cloud gate, he felt as if he had passed through a layer of water. A moist feeling enveloped his body, and when he stepped on solid ground, he went from day to night, temporarily blinding him. However, he didn't sense any danger. He could sense that the Empress, Li Yuanzhu and Lin Dong were not far ahead. As he gradually adapted to the dim light, everything around him began to enter his eyes. They were standing on a protruding rock in the middle of a hollowed-out mountain. In front of them was a stone bridge about 6 meters wide. There was no guardrail and it was pitch black below the bridge. They couldn't tell how deep it was, and they could only vaguely hear the sound of flowing water. The stone bridge was 100 feet long, and it led to a huge platform in the middle of the mountain. Below the platform was a rock pillar that extended into the bottomless darkness. The top of the stone pillar began to spread in all directions in an arc like a big bowl. The light came from the braziers at the 4 corners of the platform. No one knew how long the raging flames had been burning. Judging from the time, it was at least several thousand years, and they still hadn't extinguished. The most eye-catching thing was the huge black shadow lying in the middle of the platform. It was 40 to 50 feet long and 10 feet tall. Its body was like that of a ravenous wolf, and its entire body was scarlet red. However, its head was that of a dragon's head. Its appearance was strange and its eyes were tightly shut, as if it was in a deep sleep. It's Yazi. Lin Dong inhaled a deep breath of air and said, "It is said that there is a Yazi under Dekan. This should be it." Rinpoche's gaze moved slightly. Yazi? That Yazi who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance? The kindness of a single meal must be repaid, and the grievance of a single stare must be avenged? A legendary creature? The second son of the dragon? When the legendary creature appeared in front of him, he felt a strange sense of alienation. However, this world even had Qilins and dragons. Previously, in the tomb under the palace, they had also seen the corpse of a soaring serpent, so it was not surprising that a dragon would appear here. After all, the owner of this tomb was a human emperor. But looking at its size, it wasn't something the fake Qilin in the imperial palace could compare to. They were both legendary creatures, but Qi Shui was so weak that it made people's hair stand on end. At most, it had the strength of a cardinal heaven expert. Could it be because it was too young? Qi Shui was about 50 or 60 years old, maybe he was still underage? Just like Lin Xiaola. Or was it because in this land of exile, even the strength of these legendary creatures would be affected? Is it still alive? Ren Baqin asked softly, afraid that he would wake up the Yizi on the platform. From the looks of it, this thing should be the second level? He's already dead. There's no sign of life in his body. After the Empress finished speaking, she strode forward. Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief when he heard that he was dead. This legendary creature had such a huge body, and it seemed that its combat power was not low. In particular, it was still guarding the platform. It would be troublesome if it accidentally fell during the battle. After heaving a sigh of relief, Ren Baqin felt that it was a pity. Deacon definitely didn't let the Yizi guard here to eat everyone who came in. With the strength of the longevity heaven, the Empress might be able to pass. If this Yizi was brought out alive, it would be a great fighting force. However, after being washed away by the river of time, the legendary Yizi was now just an empty shell. Ren Baqin walked forward and carefully sized up this huge creature that was 3 meters tall even when it was lying down. Even though it was dead, he could still feel the ferocity and fierceness of its body, mainly because of the pressure of its huge body. However, he could see a trace of calmness on its face. He didn't know how long it had been guarding here, but the descendant that the human emperor had been waiting for didn't come. There was no unwillingness, reluctance, or unbearable loneliness. It was as if it was peacefully following its master in its sleep. Ren Baqin couldn't help but reach out to touch it. As an earthling, it would be strange if he didn't want to touch such a creature. It didn't turn into ashes like the flying serpent. It felt cold and hard as if touching wood and stone. Let's go. The Empress stopped in front of the corpse of the Yizi for a moment before stepping on the stone bridge behind it. The others didn't have Ren Baqin's strange and regretful feelings. In their opinion, this was just a kind of ferocious beast. At most, it was more powerful when it was alive, and its master was more amazing. At the end of the stone bridge were 2 tall stone doors with a map-like pattern painted on them. It's the map of Ansu. Lin Dong identified it and then added, Ansu is the area under the control of Deacon. I remember that there are 237 areas, and the human race controls 10? Deacon only control one area of Ansu? Ren Baqin asked curiously. There were only 5 human emperors in total. Could it be that Deacon was a weaker human emperor? Ansu is the birthplace of the human race and the most prosperous place at that time, Lin Dong explained. Didn't you only know a little after lifting the coffins of your ancestors? How do you know so much now? Ren Baqin asked, full of doubt that Ren Baqin was hiding a lot of things. He was the one who found Deacon's tomb, knew that the Yizi was a ferocious beast under Deacon, and even knew about Ansu. He didn't know how much he didn't say. It was really puzzling that Lin Dong knew so many things. Lin Dong was silent for a while and said in a strangely calm tone, When I go back, I will lift all the coffins of my ancestors. This time, even Li Yuanzhu couldn't help but look at him with surprise in her eyes. Even if your ancestors knew a little, only the first 2 generations of ancestors would know, right? Ren Baqin was stunned for a moment before continuing. Over the past thousands of years, more than one tomb has been discovered. Occasionally there will be some discoveries left behind by the ancestors, Lin Dong said indifferently. Your ancestors dug up graves for no reason? Now you even dug up their graves? Sure enough, those who dug up people were dug up. Ren Baqin had a strange look on his face and didn't know where to start. There were too many things to complain about. If your ancestors knew that you were like this, they would probably strangle you at first sight. However, after thinking about it carefully, Ren Baqin and the others weren't much better. Weren't they digging up the tomb of the human emperor? Ren Baqin gave him a thumbs up and didn't speak anymore. The Empress pushed the stone door twice but it didn't budge. She exerted all her strength, surged her blood, and a shadow appeared behind her before slowly pushing the stone door open. It revealed a stone room with a radius of more than 30 meters. A burly man in metal armor was sitting in it. Just as the Empress was about to step forward, she suddenly looked incredulous and cried out, "There is vitality in his body. Is Deacon alive?" Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 1093. There's vitality in his body. Is Deacon still alive? The Empress stared in disbelief at the figure in the stone room. Her and Lin Dong's facial expressions changed. The person in the stone room gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. Both of them could feel the pressure coming from the person's body. It was like a volcano that could erupt at any moment and turn everything in front of it into ashes. However, there was a sense of lifelessness to this oppression. The other party's body retained its strength, but not its vitality. However, a palm-sized area near his heart contained a faint trace of vitality and a huge amount of qi and blood that emitted light and heat like the sun, burning and boiling everything. The trace of vitality was hidden in this huge amount of qi and blood. Unlike ordinary people, the qi and blood of ordinary people were constantly emitting vitality. It was contained in every drop of blood and every cell. However, the vitality in the body in front of him was very little. There was only a trace of it, and it was swimming in the huge qi and blood that was like a scorching sun. It was like a fish swimming in water, using this trace of vitality to activate the huge mass of qi and blood, so that it would not dissipate after death like a normal creature. It was this trace of vitality that shocked the Empress. Rinpoche was completely stunned. Alive? After all, it had been 5,000 years since the human race was driven to this place. In other words, this Deacon had lived for 5,000 years? Boom. It was as if a dull drum had exploded in the sky and pounded on everyone's hearts. This was the heartbeat of the body in front of them. With this heartbeat, the huge amount of qi and blood flowed through Deacon's body like a river that had opened the floodgates. After circulating all over his body, it returned to his heart. This time, even the other parts of his body emitted traces of vitality as if they were alive. This made the Empress subconsciously stand in front of Rinpoche and be on guard. However, as time passed, this trace of vitality gradually dissipated. Deacon's body returned to its lifeless state, with only a trace of vitality and a huge amount of qi and blood lingering in the small space around his heart. Everyone at the entrance of the stone room was silent and stared at Deacon, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. What's going on? Is the Emperor still alive? Rinpoche asked carefully. Yes, there's still a trace of vitality in his body. A mass of qi and blood is gathered in one place, the Empress said softly. What do we do now? Should we burn some incense and paper and say that we are here to pay respects to the Emperor? Rinpoche's mind was racing. This situation was too shocking. If the other party were to wake up and find out that they were here to open his coffin, would he be angry? Cult Master Lin, didn't your patriarch's coffin mention this situation? How long can a human emperor normally live? Rinpoche couldn't help but ask. Lin Dong could not be bothered with the first half of his sentence, but he did reply to the second half. I don't know. But it definitely won't live for 5,000 years. Rinpoche carefully sized up Deacon, who was sitting cross-legged. From his appearance, Deacon seemed to be in his 40s or 50s. He had a majestic body and a dignified face. She was wearing a set of grayish-black metal armor. The front part of her body looked like the head of a strange beast, and the bottom part was a battle skirt. Even after thousands of years, there was not a single speck of dust on her armor, and it emitted a faint light. Beside him was a huge double-edged battle axe, the surface of which was as big as a door. From the looks of it, this human emperor was similar to the ancient race in that he focused on cultivating his physique. In Rinpoche's opinion, the main difference between the Aboriginals and the other nations was the physical and soul cultivators. The former focused on blood essence and strengthened the body. The latter focused on essence and strengthened the soul. It was obvious that Deacon was a physical cultivator. Deacon's right hand touched the ground lightly. Upon closer inspection, one could see that he had written 8 words on the ground with his fingers. With my broken body I will protect the human race. Seeing these words, Rinpoche felt as if he had been struck in the heart. An indescribable complex emotion rose from the bottom of his heart. It was as if he had seen the bloody battles of the human race, the human emperor protecting millions of humans, and the sad song of the human race from thousands of years ago. The weight of these 8 words and the emotions contained in them made him sigh faintly. From these 8 words, one could understand the person in front of him. The Empress's eyes flickered as she was struck in the heart by these 8 words. Only such a person could be called the emperor of the human race. Compared to him, she was still a little bit inferior. Bowing to the other party was the greatest etiquette of the Aboriginals. The words left behind by the human emperor had taught her the biggest lesson of all. The human emperor is already dead, the empress said faintly as if she had understood something. However, she changed the name of Dekan to human emperor. This is the broken body he left behind. After saying this, the empress took 3 steps forward. Suddenly, her surroundings turned dark, and she felt as if she was standing in a void. 3 meters in front of her stood a majestic man in armor with his hands behind his back. His eyes were like the starry sky, and he seemed to be looking at her or something else. "Junior, my broken body can still be used to help you," Dekan said. "The opportunity is in the Spirit Sword Mountain." With just these 2 sentences, Dekan's figure turned into countless light spots and flowed into the Empress's sea of knowledge. Knowledge from Dekan flowed into the Empress's memory. The Empress felt as if she was floating on the sea and being swept by a storm. After an unknown amount of time, the storm subsided and the waves calmed down. When she recovered, she felt a familiar person tugging at her. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty?" The Empress turned her head and saw that she was still in the stone room with Rinpoche beside her. He looked a little anxious, and when he saw her looking over, he heaved a sigh of relief. Lin Dong and Li Yuanzhu were also looking at her. "How long have I been standing?" the Empress asked. "In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea." Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, after taking 3 steps forward, she suddenly stood there in a daze for a full 5 minutes, which shocked him. What exactly happened? The Empress rubbed her forehead and said, "I obtained some things left by the Emperor." She turned to look at Dekan and bowed again. Then, she placed her palm on Dekan's forehead and vibrated her sea of knowledge to form a certain frequency to connect with Dekan's body according to the contents of the knowledge left by Dekan. After a while, the Empress felt as if there were a few lines connecting her and Dekan's body. As the Empress thought about it, Dekan suddenly moved his fingers. Although the movement was very small, it couldn't be hidden from everyone, and they were immediately shocked. The Empress knew that this was all she could do at present. According to the knowledge in her mind, she needed some time to truly control Dekan's body. Then she waved at everyone and said, "Don't be nervous." Looking at Dekan's body, the Empress slowly said with admiration, "The Emperor knows that the longer we stay in this land of exile, the weaker the human race will be and the harder it will be to fight against the foreign races. Therefore he burned his spirit and refined his body into a weapon that can reach up to 70% of his strength and can be used 3 times. Following the Empress's words, the other 3 were stunned. They looked at the Emperor who was sitting cross-legged and then at the 8 words on the ground. All of them were moved. "With my broken body, I protect the human race. Come. Miao Shu Wu." Chapter 1094. Everyone stayed in the valley for half a month, and the Empress went to Dekan's tomb every day. Half a month later, a tall figure in a long robe appeared behind the Empress. It was the body of the human Emperor Kan. He could use 70% of Dekan's strength 3 times. This was the last weapon the human Emperor had left behind for his descendants. It was his own body. He had paid a huge price for this by burning his spirit and vanishing into thin air. There was no possibility of reincarnation. All this was for his descendants to leave this land of exile one day. This was the glimmer of hope left by the human Emperor. With the strength of the human Emperor, even if he could only use 70% of it, it was still a huge fighting force that would allow the human race to resist when facing a formidable enemy. At least for Rinpoche and the others, the foreign races that they were most worried about in 10 to 20 years weren't invincible. As long as they could buy some time, the more time they had, the stronger the power they could use would be. This was the Emperor of the human race, and even the Empress had great respect for him. In addition, there were many other things that were obtained from the tomb of the human Emperor. There was some knowledge about the 237 regions of the Lansang territory, as well as the techniques of the human Emperor Kan. The 237 regions were known as the 10,000 races. According to their strength, there were only 36 powerful races, known as the upper 36 races. One of these races was the herdsman that they had seen before, the acceptance Ling race. There were 369 middle-level races including the human race. The Thunder Barbarians, Negu Ba by Tian Sun by Xiang Su, and other races that Rinpoche had seen in the 60,000 mountains were all here. The human race was the only race with the strength of a middle-level race that could compete with or even surpass the superior races. As for the inferior and weak races, there were countless of them. Most of them were vassals of other races and had low combat power. There were at least a few thousand races. In fact, according to the strength of an ordinary individual, the human race was considered an inferior race. However, in the past millions of years, there were countless geniuses among the human race who were able to shine brightly in the history of the human race. Some of them, such as Kan, were able to fight against the top-grade experts from the top-grade clans. Therefore, the human race was classified as one of the 369 middle-grade clans. As for Kan's technique, it was also one of the strongest techniques of the ancient human race, the Great Sun technique, which could be practiced to the body realm. The body realm was the realm above the heaven and earth realm and the immortality realm. There was no difference in terms of physical cultivation or soul cultivation. Apart from these 2 points, there were some other things. There were 2 things that caught people's attention the most. One was Spirit Sword Mountain. In the words that Kan left behind, the opportunity was in the Spirit Sword Mountain. However, other than that, the Empress searched through the things that Kan left behind, but there was no news about the Spirit Sword Mountain. What everyone knew was that the Sword Master's Spirit Sword came from Spirit Sword Mountain. However, no one knew where the Spirit Sword Mountain was, what the Spirit Sword Mountain was like, and how the Spirit Sword Mountain was formed. All of these were hidden in the fog. Apart from that, there was also a map without any explanation. However, everyone knew that Emperor Kan would not leave behind something worthless. This map must contain something of great value. Some people guessed that it was the tomb of an expert, some guessed that it was a powerful treasure, and some thought that it was a secret manual. These things seemed to be valuable, but the first 2 didn't make sense. Given Kan's status, he wouldn't leave a map in his memory. It was just about these things. The last possibility was that when the human race left their homeland, they might have hidden some things. However, thousands of years had passed, so it was unknown whether those things still existed. Of course, this was only a possibility. As for what exactly it was, perhaps only by deciphering the location of that map could they find out. When Kan's remnant body walked out of the valley with the Empress, it meant that the matter of the Emperor's tomb had come to an end. The harvest from this trip was huge, and the most valuable was the situation in the Kanglan region, Kan's martial arts and Kan's remnant body. However, there were also 2 huge mysteries. One was the Spirit Sword Mountain, and the other was that inexplicable map. Do we need someone to guard this valley? Ho Dajiang asked. Forget it, there's nothing left in it. The Empress turned her head to look at the valley and shook her head. Even Kan's remnant body had been taken away by him, so there were no more secrets in this valley. As for Yazi's corpse, it was also carried out of the mountain. Rinpochen was very interested in this thing and wanted to bring it back for someone to examine. On the way back, the Empress was very silent, while Rinpochen tried to find the location of that map. If the location of that map wasn't in the 237 square kilometers of the Kanglan region, then it should be somewhere along the human race's route to the land of exile. It would be best if he could restore that route, but if he couldn't, he would find the general route and then follow the map. In any case, as long as there was a slight possibility of finding it, he had to try. Somewhere in a small town in Great Xia, there were many sword-wielding martial artists these days. There weren't many inns in the town, but now, almost all of them were full and there weren't any guest rooms. There were even some people who simply turned into guests and stayed in the homes of some commoners or even wealthy families. With so many martial artists, there were naturally some bloodshed. Perhaps it was due to verbal conflicts, or perhaps it was due to a long-standing hatred, but almost every morning, a few corpses could be found in the corners of the streets and alleys. For a time, the town was in chaos. A few days later, there was a huge battle in the mountains outside the town. Hundreds of martial artists were fighting over an ancient secret scroll. In the past thousands of years, ancient secret scrolls would appear from time to time, and every time they appeared, it would cause a reign of terror. This time, because there were no spirit wheel experts, the fight was even more tragic. 2 figures appeared in the dark and watched the fight below. One of them was Du Laolu. On one hand, he was paying attention to the fight below, and on the other hand, he was busy massaging the shoulders of a beautiful lady sitting on a rock. Du Laolu only jumped out from the darkness when the fight for the upper hand was about to end. He laughed exaggeratedly and said, "This book is fated with me. Leave the secret manual behind and leave quickly. Do you think you can still keep your lives?" Everyone was at the most critical moment of the fight, and suddenly, a fellow who wasn't even at the earth wheel level jumped out and spoke nonsense, causing everyone to curse. Du Laolu sneered and shouted, "Wifey, go!" Following Du Laolu's words, a graceful figure crossed a distance of hundreds of meters and joined the fight. A moment later, Du Laolu beamed with joy as he received the secret scroll that the lady threw at him. After touching it a few times, he immediately curled his lips and said, "It's not this. Wifey, you got it wrong again." The lady raised her eyebrows and slapped him. "Are you blaming me?" "Sorry, it's all my fault." Du Laolu immediately lowered his head. "Wifey, are you tired?" After a while, he happily boasted, "In any case, I have already obtained Yagui's true teachings, and those things in the school are useless. Now that I can fly freely in the vast sea and sky, it's better to find it slowly." Baidu Search 881 Chinese Network. No advertising words. Chapter 1095. Why is there no location on this map left by Deacon? Why didn't Deacon leave more information about Spirit Sword Mountain? Ren Baqin muttered to himself in doubt. If Deacon wanted people to find the location of the map, why didn't he leave any information? Since Deacon said that the opportunity was at Spirit Sword Mountain, why didn't he leave the location of Spirit Sword Mountain? It wasn't like he said to the world, "Do you want my treasures? If you want them, go to the sea and look for them. I put them all there." If he didn't want others to find it, why did he leave the map and point out Spirit Sword Mountain? At that time, only the Empress got the information. Ren Baqin, Li Yuanzhu and Lin Dong didn't get it. In other words, only Longevity Heaven could get it, or there was only one successor. In this case, there was no need to be secretive. Or was there a secret in these two places, just like the human race, where information about the Kanglan domain couldn't be left behind? Even if there were unknown restrictions, there was an agreement. The ancestors of the human race tried to leave behind all kinds of information about the Kanglan domain, and the Emperor tried to leave behind a lot of information about the Kanglan domain. Could it be that the Emperor didn't know where Spirit Sword Mountain was? Could it be that Spirit Sword Mountain was on the map? Ren Baqin thought about it and felt that this was the most likely possibility. If this was the case, how did Deacon know that the opportunity was at Spirit Sword Mountain? Judging from the things left by Deacon, the opportunity here should be the opportunity for the human race to leave the land of exile. Deacon must know something, but he didn't leave any useful information. With these doubts, Ren Baqin and the Empress returned to the imperial capital. As soon as they returned to the palace, the Empress lay down on the bed without a care for her image. "Your Majesty, every emperor has his own path. Not all emperors are the same." Ren Baqin calmed himself down, lay down beside the Empress and looked at her sideways. The Empress was cold, not taciturn. Although it sometimes looked like it, it was actually completely different. Ren Baqin knew that the Empress was a little troubled after seeing Deacon. He also knew what was bothering her. The Empress let out a long hum, and seemed a little dispirited. Some emperors are the rulers of development, some are the rulers of conservation, and some are the rulers of prosperity. "Your Majesty, guess which one are you?" The Empress glanced at him. "Naturally, it's the Emperor of Expansion and Prosperity." "Ha!" Ren Baqin laughed. "Do you have any objections?" The Empress's eyes were filled with danger. "Of course not. I've said it before, His Majesty is an emperor throughout the ages. At present, Dayo had just started to develop. In the next few decades, Dayo would develop to a level that no one could imagine. Those who couldn't keep up with this development would be eliminated. The development of the past few decades was much greater than the development of the previous few thousand years. His Majesty will be eulogized by future generations. What's there to be troubled about, Your Majesty? Ren Baqin asked in a light tone. After a long time, the Water Empress said, "That's right." After saying this, the Empress seemed to be in a better mood. "There will be a test flight tomorrow. Does Your Majesty want to go and take a look?" Ren Baqin asked again when he saw that she seemed to have calmed down. "Of course I have to go," the Empress replied without hesitation. Following which she said softly, "I'm hungry." The food on the road was naturally not as delicious as the ones in the palace. More importantly, the fork-horned cows that she brought with her had already been eaten in the valley. For the rest of the month she hadn't eaten her fill. The consumption of ordinary ingredients was too high for the Empress to eat her fill. It had to be said that this was a sad story. "What do you want to eat?" "I'll instruct the Imperial Kitchen." "Hot pot. Instruct the Imperial Kitchen to prepare 500 kilograms of meat slices for the hot pot with a diameter of 3 meters. The new campus of the Black Bamboo Academy was located in the northeast of the capital, between the 3rd and 4th Ring Roads. It occupied an area of more than 6,000 square meters and had a reserve area of more than 3,000 square meters. It could be called the largest academy in the world. It had the largest number of laboratories in the world, including biology, chemistry, physics, and so on. There were more than 8 physics laboratories. This included 8 grades and more than 2,000 students. There was also a full-time teaching staff, 1 person. This number was pitifully small. Fortunately, there were dozens of robots and senior students who were teaching the junior students. Otherwise, the Black Bamboo Academy would have the weakest teachers in the world. In addition, the Sword Master would also come to teach the senior students from time to time. With the Sword Master's learning ability, knowledge, and combat power, he was competent enough. Combat power was especially important for teaching here. The test flight of the plane was held in the experimental park of the Black Bamboo Academy, and there were 2 runways. When Rinpoche arrived, not only were the undergraduate students here, but some experts and the Sword Master from the Mount Zhongshan laboratory were also here. While waiting, a white man with a big nose came to Rinpoche's side and said in half-baked Mandarin, "Your Highness, we need to build an observatory by the sea. This world is too wonderful and we need more information. We may have discovered a huge secret that is simply incredible." You can't imagine how surprised we were when we realized this. His name was Claude and he was a famous physicist on Earth. Of course, that was in the past. After coming to this new world, the seemingly taciturn Claude burst out with great enthusiasm and went to the laboratory. This was the first time that he had taken the initiative to ask Rinpoche for something and revealed his nature as a chatterbox. "What secret?" Rinpoche asked curiously. "Of course it's a secret." Claude winked at Rinpoche. "If I tell you, it won't be a secret anymore." Rinpoche laughed. "Someone drag him away and let him know the consequences of being mischievous." "Oh no, let go of me. It's not that I want to hide it from you, but it's just a guess at the moment and I need more information to prove it," Claude hurriedly shouted. "I'm also very interested in guesses." Rinpoche got someone to let go of him, personally straightened his collar, and then slapped him on the shoulder. "Tell me, what did you discover?" "Eastern barbarians?" Claude mumbled as he covered his shoulder. He then looked at Rinpoche and said seriously, "This is a very, very important guess. At present, there's no more evidence, so it's just a guess. If it turns out that the guess is wrong, it's normal in research and you can't blame us for it." "No problem." Rinpoche was supportive of Claude's desire to live. "Alright, I'm going to tell you now. Don't be too surprised," Claude said while looking at Rinpoche. Rinpoche felt that Claude still needed to be taught a lesson. He was so mischievous and could easily get beaten up. "There are 2 moons in this world, and one of them might be fake." Rinpoche widened his eyes in disbelief and asked, "Are you serious?" Chapter 1096. Are you telling the truth? Yes, no. Is the moon real or fake? Fake real. Is it real or fake? *CK it's really fake. Are you messing with me? *CK I hate Chinese. The above was pure nonsense and it didn't happen. Although Claude's Chinese wasn't very good, Rinpoche could still understand what he was trying to say. The moon is fake? Rinpoche felt incredulous. There were 2 moons in this world, one yellow and one red. They rose opposite each other and reflected each other's radiance. Both were bigger than the moon on Earth. He had been in this world for so long, but never thought that one of the moons in this world was fake. This conjecture was really frightening. Why do you have such a conjecture? Based on the size of this planet, the distance from the moon, the strength of gravity, and the tides, if these 2 moons are real, the dry and rainy seasons won't be as distinct as they are now. The tides are also completely different, and the rotation of the planet should be slower instead of being closer to Earth and rotating 24 hours a day. Claude gave Rinpoche a variety of explanations based on the size of the planet, the angle of the shadow, the observed distance from the moon, the change of the seasons and the tides of the lake. Although Rinpoche was confused most of the time, he understood one point. Based on the current situation, one of the moons was fake. Otherwise, the rotation of the planet would be nearly stationary, the tides would be almost non-existent, the seawater would flow to the poles, the 4 seasons wouldn't change, and the region where Deo was located wouldn't even have the change of the rainy and dry seasons. Of the 2 planets, one of which only looks like the moon, is actually very small, and has almost no impact on the planet. That's why this situation occurred. Of course, this is only a conjecture based on the data collected so far. The timing and situation require tidal observations and astronomical observations to obtain more data to obtain evidence, Claude said at the end. Although he said this, his expression and voice showed his confidence in his conjecture. This was the pride of a top student. Everyone in the research institute was a top student, but Claude was sure that he was the top student. Even if the person in front of him had the power to decide his life and death, in terms of professionalism, he had always looked down on him. What equipment do you need? Give me the list, set up the observation station immediately, and give me a conclusion as soon as possible, Rinpoche said sternly. After he finished speaking, he couldn't help but look up at the sky and was almost blinded by the dazzling light. The sun was very strong today. However, no matter how hot the sun was, it was not as influential as Claude's words. If there was a fake moon in the sky, then what was that moon? An alien spaceship? Or something else? Since the beginning of history there had always been 2 moons in this world and they had never changed. What was that thing hanging in the sky for thousands of years? In Rinpoche's mind, the real situation of the moon had risen to become the most important thing and was more important than the foreign races. The true appearance of the moon affected the entire world. After receiving this news, he was a little absent-minded as he looked at the experimental aircraft. Watching them inspect, watching them launch, watching them move forward, watching them crash into the wall. This was already the 3rd flight test. It was also the 3rd time he hit the wall. The aircraft took off, but due to the short distance and low altitude, half of the aircraft scraped against the wall and tumbled out. Fortunately, a white shadow flashed by before the aircraft crashed and Tong Lan, the pilot, jumped out. This situation was very dangerous for ordinary people, but it wasn't a big risk for warriors who had speed, reaction, and strength that far exceeded ordinary people by more than 10 times. Our materials are still too heavy. We need lighter and stronger metals, Shurgan reported to Rinpoche. Well, you guys continue. I hope to see results as soon as possible. After this is done, all of you will be the first people in Deo in space. Rinpoche encouraged Shurgan and the others before leaving in a hurry. Why is Yagüe acting weird today? He seems to have something on his mind? A student asked curiously. This was an airplane, the most important project of the academy at present. However, it seemed like Yagüe didn't pay much attention to it. He was fine before, but he became like this after that foreigner spoke to Yagüe. In any case, this takeoff test was a failure. It's natural for Yagüe to find it hard to raise his spirits. We need to come up with something better. As long as we come up with a plane that can really fly, we can have glory, money and power. Shurgan waved his hand and said to everyone, "Nonsense. You have already brought out a steam car and a tractor. Why don't I see those things you mentioned?" Someone immediately exposed him. There will be in the future. Shurgan was outstanding in his ideological work, at least in terms of empty promises. However, everyone knew that these things were going to be their future experiences. Furthermore, by participating in it, their progress, vision, knowledge and practical ability would be far superior to ordinary people. You were absent-minded just now. What happened? The Empress asked after they left the Black Bamboo Academy. Yesterday Rinpoche consoled her, but today, it was her turn to ask him. These days things were always happening one after another. Rinpoche thought about it and decided to tell the Empress. One of the moons in the sky might be fake. The Empress replied faintly. Don't you find it strange? Rinpoche couldn't accept the Empress's indifferent reaction. Did she know what it meant to have a fake moon? If the moon was fake, it meant that there were people in this world who could create a fake moon in the sky. This wasn't something that could be achieved by humans. In other words, there were aliens in this world who hung a plate in the sky to play with you and watch you fight to death on the ground. Well, Your Majesty, you really don't know. Rinpoche rubbed his head. The Empress didn't know much about this. If it's fake, what's in the sky? The Empress asked. I don't know. Rinpoche spread his hands. This was the problem. Then just figure out what's in the sky. The Empress's words were simple and straightforward. Rinpoche thought for a while and asked, do you want to go to the moon and take a look? It's not from here, it's from Earth. Now, the base on the moon has been completed and is operating successfully. Now that Earth had begun to establish a base on Mars, landing on the moon was naturally a very simple task. Okay. The Empress readily agreed. She had long known that the planet was round, and she could finally see it with her own eyes. Chapter 1097. In the northwest of China. A huge building stood in the Gobi Desert. A large number of staff were entering and exiting the building. From above, it looked like busy worker ants going in and out of an ant's nest. At this moment, a silver-white rocket-shaped aircraft was ejected from the ground. It accelerated along the curved vacuum pipe at 4 times the speed of sound and was ejected into the sky from the opening above the building. This was an electromagnetic acceleration that catapulted the aircraft to a high altitude and then propelled by nuclear power. In fact, the fact that Earth could put controllable nuclear fusion into use was inseparable from Rinpoche's support for Earth's technology industry. In the history of the development of materials science and aviation technology, Rinpoche had left a heavy mark. History would remember Rinpoche's contributions, the country would remember his contributions, and the people would remember his contributions. The above statement was pure nonsense. However, it was indeed related to Rinpoche. In the past 30 years, Rinpoche had brought back some items from Dayo from time to time and combined them with Earth's technology to promote the development of a variety of technologies. These included a few new materials. One of them was an ion control device that was molded into a high-temperature resistant metal, which solved a major problem that had plagued Earth's technology for decades. At this time, Rinpoche and the Empress were sitting side by side in the aircraft. Rinxia was not far from them. In addition to the 3 of them, there were 31 other passengers. The seats were located in the hull of the aircraft. There were 34 seats on 2 floors that were distributed in a ring shape against the wall. The center was empty. When the huge centrifugal force disappeared from the body, a broadcast was heard from the aircraft, informing everyone that the aircraft had entered a stable forward state and could move without gravity according to the previous training. Due to the popularization of martial arts, the physical fitness of people on Earth was several times stronger than before. In addition, with the advancement of aviation technology, people who previously needed a lot of training to fly could now do it with very little training. For example, the Empress and Rinpoche didn't undergo any training at all. They were only told what to do before they boarded the aircraft. Everything was possible with money. Of course, the other passengers were also rich. Even now, landing on the moon was still a technological sport that only the rich could come into contact with. As soft and soothing music sounded, everyone unfastened the fasteners on their bodies. There was no gravity in the aircraft. After unfastening the fasteners, they would float in the opposite direction with a little force. It's a wonderful feeling. After the Empress finished speaking, she closed her eyes and felt the weightlessness. Along with the music, a man and a woman in their 30s slowly danced in the air. It was unknown if they had been planning this for a long time or if they were suddenly motivated by their emotions. However, this was indeed a pretty good experience. There were even others who were influenced and joined in. Although the space was large enough, it was difficult for ordinary people to control their movements and directions in the weightlessness. They would bump into each other from time to time, and they would only smile at each other. In this kind of atmosphere, even the most irascible person would calm down, let down his guard, and become gentle. As the passengers joined in, the music in the cabin changed. A female voice rang out among the crowd, singing in a voice that sounded like an aria. I was born here, but I don't know this place. What was the reason for the sunlight to illuminate the city and the growth of all living things? If it weren't for the embrace of the earth, we would have long disappeared in the vast universe. There was a woman in the crowd with her fingers clasped tightly in front of her chest and a smile on her face. Everyone quickly realized that this was a program arranged by the Moon Landing Company. As the song went on, the smiles on everyone's faces became brighter and their gazes became gentler. Through the glass of the cabin, they could see the sea of stars and the blue earth outside. Everyone was outside of Earth and in the boundless universe. An indescribable feeling came from the sea of stars, the song, and the people around them. It spread to everyone's heart. After the song ended, it changed to a lighter song. Ren Baqin held the Empress's hand and leaned against the window of the cabin. From there he could see the boundless starry sky outside. The sea of stars is the ultimate romance of mankind, Ren Baqin said to the Empress with a smile. Now that they were here, the pressure brought about by the possible attack of the foreign races and the mystery left behind by the human emperor had been greatly alleviated. It's indeed beautiful. The Empress looked at the stars in the distance and smiled. Then she held Ren Baqin's hand and walked in the air step by step without any gravity. The Empress's movements surprised everyone, and they couldn't help but suspect that she was walking on glass. Everyone looked at the Empress in amazement, and even the female singer widened her eyes. She had performed many times in the aircraft, but had never seen anyone who could do this. Even the most professional astronaut couldn't do it. Ren Baqin didn't feel surprised, but he was a little sad. He was like a human kite being led by the Empress. I don't want to lose face. Oh my God, I saw a fairy. In a cabin at the front of the aircraft, 2 astronauts were shocked when they saw the image on the monitor. How did she do it? I feel like she's walking on Earth. If I hadn't run back and forth 13 times, I would have tried to see if I could do it like her. After 37 hours, the aircraft finally landed on the moon. From the window they could already see the base not far away. The outside was covered by a layer of special curved glass that could filter sunlight. Inside, the buildings of the base looked like a crystal ball. The base covered an area of 10,000 acres and was considered huge. Even on Earth, the base on the moon could be seen with a telescope. Everyone left the aircraft in protective suits. The overly low gravity made them uncomfortable. With a light jump, they could jump more than 10 meters high and then slowly land. Their strides were very long, and they could propel themselves forward with just a light tap of their toes. It was very easy to lose their center of gravity while walking. Fortunately, the aircraft was very close to the base. A rope was pulled out and people could hold on to it to move forward. The 2 astronauts looked at the line of people and found the lady in the red protective suit. They wanted to see if she could still perform as miraculously as she did on the moon. Previously in space, they felt that the other party was the experienced astronaut and that they were rookies. Of course, even the most experienced astronaut couldn't do what she did. At this moment, the 2 of them saw the figure in the crowd and once again saw a shocking scene. They saw her walking on the surface of the moon at a very steady pace, as if she was walking on Earth. She was flying a kite at the same time. Even though she was holding on to someone, her movements didn't change at all. It looked smooth, natural, and full of beauty. Among a group of people who were walking like babies, she was extremely abrupt and eye-catching. Once again, the 2 of them wondered if they were really noobs. Come. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1098. The lunar base was only 10,000 square kilometers, and the living area was even smaller. There were monitoring stations and defense systems in the 4 corners that were used to destroy meteorites flying toward the moon. There was a hotel in the base that had its own commercial area, gambling, and other entertainment to serve the wealthy who traveled to the moon. There was even a swimming pool. Water was a luxury on the moon. It wasn't easy for ordinary employees to take a bath, let alone swim. Water was far more expensive than food. Food could be sold at 100 times the price on the lunar base. It was a different feeling to spend a lot of money on a bowl of Lanzhou ramen with pickled vegetables while looking at the distant Earth. A bowl of Lanzhou ramen? Expensive? A bowl of ramen on the moon cost 8,888 yuan. The Empress's Mengyo ice cream cost 5,888 yuan, and there were no discounts. Bring her to eat Häagen-Dazs if you love her? Who said that? Isn't it vulgar? Bring her to the moon to eat Mengyo if you love her. It was a completely different story. Ren Baqin deeply understood that the value of a product wasn't only determined by its production, but also by its location, environment, and difficulty in transportation. Leopard. The Empress pushed the chips in front of her to the full range of leopards. You cheated, you definitely cheated. A white man who wasn't far from the Empress shouted loudly. His hair stuck tightly to his scalp. As a famous gambler in Alaska, his demeanor had long been shattered by the Empress. Ren Baqin rolled his eyes. Nonsense. Even a fool would know that the Empress cheated with 28 full-range bets in a row. Then what? Bite me? Ren Baqin then looked at the man who was shouting loudly and seemed to be called Jack. He seemed to have won all his tickets to the moon. Of course, he was also a wealthy man, but he was more proud of his gambling skills. However, he looked like he was going crazy. Ren Baqin responded with a gloating smile. You even dared to flirt with my wife. Have you ever died in your life? Are you arrogant? Are you still going to suppress me? Rinpoche asked in a frivolous tone. He then looked at the other party's face, which was like a traffic light. The ignorant are fearless, the Empress said in a cold tone. She didn't even look at the other party and didn't care about him at all. However, this kind of behavior made people feel short of breath and have a brain infarction. The dealer broke out in a cold sweat. She was already the fourth dealer to be replaced. However, it was still a full circle every time. The person in charge of the casino had been studying for 20 minutes, but he still couldn't figure out how the Asian woman had cheated. She clearly hadn't touched anything. However, no matter who rolled the dice, no matter how many pairs of dice were changed, no matter how they did it, even if they cheated, they would definitely get a perfect score. It was simply too strange. Now that the gambling chips were in an uproar, all the customers stopped playing and gathered around the dice table to see how many full range points they could get. That Jack's face was filled with a myriad of emotions. He slammed the table angrily, then stood up and left. A fool wouldn't appear here. Of course, although he had lost quite a bit before, it wasn't a bet, so it wasn't unacceptable for him to lose. The casino lost the most, but no matter how badly they lost, there was nothing they could do. They couldn't play any tricks here. Furthermore, the aircraft that Rinpoche and the Empress took was also from China, so they couldn't reach out their hands. When the dice were rolled again, there was a burst of exclamation from the crowd. Sure enough, there were 3 identical dice under the cover of the dice bug. Boring, let's go. The Empress stood up with her hands behind her back. The crowd automatically made way for her. Rinpoche gestured to Rin Xia to let him handle the rest of the transactions. As for whether there would be any trouble, Rinpoche believed that the new hero would be able to handle it well. Rin Xia looked at Uncle and Auntie leaving, clicked his tongue and said, "Auntie's gait is really majestic and imposing. I wonder what kind of person she is. I reckon that there's no hope for Uncle to change his henpecked life." In the eyes of others, the Empress's gait was like that of a real dragon. Every move she made had a unique sense of beauty, and that kind of imposing manner was something that no one else had. Rin Xia had seen many high officials with his father, but none of them gave him the feeling that Auntie was as imposing and natural as her. He had seen so many women, but none of them could compare to Auntie. They couldn't even compare a little bit. When the two of them left the gambling hall, they saw Jack. Even though they left one after the other, it didn't seem like a chance encounter. Instead, Jack was waiting for them. "Oh, do you want a duel?" Rinpoche stretched out his pinky finger and said, "I can defeat you with this." Jack's face was like a traffic light again. He then said to Rinpoche, "Rinpoche, internationally wanted criminal, I know who you are." "And then? Will anyone come to catch me?" Rinpoche asked calmly. If not for Jack's reminder, he would have forgotten that he was still a wanted criminal. It had been too long. 30 million yuan. "I just want to ask you one question." Jack ignored Rinpoche. He knew that Rinpoche wasn't an ordinary person. He was an internationally wanted criminal, and he actually appeared here without any obstruction. Furthermore, even though the United States had issued a warrant for his arrest, they didn't take any action afterward. From this point, everyone knew that Rinpoche wasn't someone that ordinary people could afford to offend. Naturally, no one would come to find trouble with him. There were a few police cars parked there, and the people in them were nervously watching. Further away, there seemed to be people on standby. The feeling of being locked on by the corner of the building. Was there a sniper? The other party was really making a big fuss. Even if she was an earth wheel expert, it would be difficult for her to escape under such circumstances. She might be able to do it, but she wouldn't do it. She was Ning Kaichen, the most influential celebrity in China. She wasn't ready to give up this identity. "You must have made a mistake. I'm innocent, but I can go back with you." "Of course, I will file a complaint later," Ning Kaichen said calmly. The other party didn't know, but Ning Kaichen knew what kind of power and strength he had behind him. She wasn't worried about whether she could get out or not. She was a little puzzled as to why the other party had found her and when she had been targeted. However, she had a premonition that this would happen sooner or later, and it wouldn't be too long. This time, Zhao Prince Consort was in a hurry. Unlike before, when he had chosen scientists of all kinds who weren't very famous, there weren't many similarities. These people were all experts in the aerospace industry. They were well known and highly valued in various countries. There were also a lot of them. Someone would definitely notice. As a result, she was more careful than before. She didn't expect to be targeted so quickly. However, what surprised her even more was that she was quickly transferred to a detention center after being arrested. The other party's motive didn't seem simple. She was transferred underground and it would be troublesome for Green Bead to break in. Needless to say, Ning Caichen's arrest caused a huge uproar in China. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs immediately made a tough statement. When Ren Baqin returned to Earth, he also heard this extremely surprising news. Come. Miao Shu Wu. As for whether it was appropriate to bring his wife out when something happened, of course it was appropriate. Within a day, Ren Baqin received a call from Yang Senator. Although he was still in charge of the Messier 87 department, his status was much higher than before, and his rank had also been raised. It was only because he had dealt with him a lot that the higher-ups didn't want to replace him. That was why he had been sitting in that position all this time. To be honest, he had succeeded because of himself, and he had also failed because of himself. He had been restricted there. The higher-ups are exerting their strength. Don't be anxious, Yang Sen said immediately. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't envious of the bald man. His appearance hadn't changed much over the years. However, he also knew that he wouldn't be able to survive. Although he could come into contact with more cultivation techniques and wanted to cultivate, it would be very difficult for him to do so in his current position. Now that he had nothing to do, he practiced as a way to strengthen his body. Now that the nation's research in this area was relatively deep, there would be a greater increase in lifespan only when one reached the Earth rank. Ren Baqin had no chance. I understand, Ren Baqin replied faintly. If you go to the fog capital, it will be very dangerous. Yang Sen expressed his attitude. What do you know? Ren Baqin sensed that Yang Sen was revealing something. They are ready and waiting to invite you into the trap, Yang Sen said bluntly. Of course, they also want to dig out something from the movie star Ning Caichen. Ren Baqin understood that the other party's target was indeed him, but Ning Caichen was also very important to them. Don't worry, I'm just going for a vacation. There won't be any danger. Ren Baqin smiled and then his tone changed. How did they find out about my relationship with Ning Caichen? Don't treat their intelligence agency as fools. Their nose is sharper than a dog's, Yang Sen pointed out. Previously, Ning Caichen attended Ren Baqin's wedding banquet and went to Wuxia City to look for him several times. Not many people knew about this, but it wasn't like no one knew. Besides, those experts in the aerospace industry are all treasures. 11 of them have gone missing recently, which has a huge impact, Yang Sen said. In fact, even some of the higher-ups weren't satisfied with this matter. One had to know that the people on Earth were now complacently looking at the universe. No matter which country's scientists made a breakthrough, the whole world would benefit from it. Without those outstanding scientists, there wouldn't be today's technology on Earth. Every one of them was a treasure in the world. As a result, there were so many famous aerospace scientists who had gone missing in a row. 3 of them were under the age of 40 and had great potential, and they were likely to make great contributions. Under such circumstances, even if Ren Baqin didn't take advantage of the people around him, it would still cause some people to be disgusted. Air Hua seems to have gotten fatter recently. The Empress looked at Air Hua, who was peeling the roof tiles nearby. She didn't know when her chin had become 2 layers, but her cheeks, which originally had baby fat, were now rounder. In addition, her body, which was wider than an ordinary person's, looked very eye-catching. However, the problem was that she hadn't eaten much recently. She ate less than 50 kilograms a day. Her classmates have all lost weight, Ren Baqin replied. She stole other people's food to eat. Ren Baqin didn't know what kind of expression to make. He remembered that Air Hua used to eat with the Empress, and the Empress would eat Air Hua's food for every meal. It had to be mentioned that Ren Baqin's status in the family was quite high. In other families it was the son, daughter, mother, cat, dog, father. In this family it was the Empress, Ren Baqin, Air Hua, pet. The second and third positions were rotated from time to time according to the standard of seeking death and playing around. In any case, Ren Baqin was still quite full. This could be attributed to him being good at snatching food from the Empress's mouth without getting beaten up. Air Hua wasn't as good as her father. Later on, Air Hua learned to be smart and went to the imperial kitchen to get special treatment, but her appetite was only so-so. Now that she was in kindergarten, Air Hua inherited the Empress's fine tradition and even surpassed her father. It was unknown whether it was because she had confirmed her position as the leader or because other people's food was exceptionally delicious. In any case, she got half of it. Now she was the tyrant in the kindergarten. After a few months, she felt that her neck had become shorter. After all, this was his daughter. Looking at Hua thriving every day, Renbaqian's heart was always in pain and happy. This was the complex feeling of being a parent. At night, when Hua returned to Chengel Palace to sleep, Renbaqian and the Empress returned to Earth, changed their clothes and went to Fog City. Renbaqian's eyebrows were glued to his forehead. They were the kind of sword-like eyebrows that he had been envious of for a long time. When he looked in the mirror, he looked outstanding and unrestrained. This was his own opinion. There's actually no army or police. Renbaqian was slightly surprised. He thought that the other party would be ready for battle. After all, he was still carrying a wanted order. Chapter 1101. Today, on the way back from Sanya, he had a 10-hour stopover in Shanghai for a connecting flight. He thought that excluding the check-in time, he would have 8 hours to write his story and take a nap. In the end, there was a delay. Furthermore, when he arrived, he had to wait for 40 minutes for the hotel to pick him up. It took another half an hour to go to the hotel. After eating something, he had to prepare to leave in 4 hours. Tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. He reckoned that there was no chance of sleeping. He was working hard to write his story. The worst thing was that he was wearing a singlet and slippers when he alighted from the plane. He was actually taking a high-class flight. Shanghai was only 10 degrees Celsius, and the bone-chilling wind made his clothes messy. His head was already starting to hurt. He reckoned that he would catch a cold. He would work hard to write his story. There would be an update in a while. The gigolo from the Empress's family was a scam this time. Currently typing. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1102. They've arrived. 2 people from China. Target confirmed. Observe closely and don't act rashly. This time we're acting on our own. Get ready to attack and wait for the target to enter the area. Attack directly? Once again, the target is very dangerous. I've already shown you that video. According to the information, that woman is even more terrifying. According to the standard shown in the video, they won't be able to break through our encirclement. However, we don't know how much their strength has changed over the years. No matter how much they change, they won't be able to escape in the open area. In a certain building somewhere in the Fog City, rows of images were floating in the air. Orders were being issued one after another, and countless people were running around inside. Although there were only 2 people, not many people felt that they were making a mountain out of a molehill. The strength of the other party was indeed terrifying, and the value of the other party was worthy of such treatment. LHR Airport was one of the top 10 airports in the world. It could handle about 80 million passengers a year, which was equivalent to more than 200,000 a day. Including the airport staff, it wasn't a small number. Renbaqian pondered that the other party didn't want both sides to fight here and blow up the place. After all, there were too many people. If something happened here, the casualties would be too heavy, and they simply couldn't afford it. Even if 100,000 soldiers were killed or injured, they would have to commit seppuku. If 100,000 civilians, tourists, and elites from all walks of life were killed or injured, even their ancestors would have to crawl out of their graves to appease the public. No one dared to do that. The 2 of them walked out of the airport unhurriedly. There was a row of driverless taxis parked outside. Sometimes, computer control was more accurate than human control. With so many cars, the taxis were very fast and orderly. After getting into the taxi, Renbaqian spoke the address in Mandarin. A 3-dimensional map of the address, a map of the surroundings, an aerial view, and detailed information appeared on the screen in front of him. He glanced at it and said, "Confirm." The taxi immediately turned away from the flow of traffic. Simple, convenient, and fast. Communicating directly in Mandarin, as long as the Mandarin wasn't too bad, it could be distinguished. Renbaqian vaguely remembered that he had a university classmate from Guangdong province. He was so fluent in Mandarin that he had to rely on pen and paper to communicate. If you can understand 2 words put together, consider it my loss. The most amazing thing was that after 4 years in university, his Mandarin had not improved much. This made many people wonder how he had survived alone in S-City for the past few years. This memory was from a long time ago, and it suddenly popped up after seeing this accurate automatic language conversion system. His classmates were already 55 or 56 years old. They were only one step away from enjoying their old age. Time was really a butcher's knife. "Did you bring wine?" the Empress asked. "Yes, I did. Not much, just 5 bottles. Rinpoche brought them with him in his carry-on luggage. Don't ask how he did it anyway. "Where's the AD calcium milk?" the Empress asked again. "Yes, I brought half a box," Rinpoche replied immediately. The two of them did not even bring a change of clothes, and the suitcase was filled with these things. "I also brought 2 bottles of vinegar. It doesn't taste good here." Rinpoche told the Empress all the treasures that he brought. Finally he said, "You must protect your luggage well when you fight. We are relying on these things to survive. The food here tastes bad, I wonder if there will be vinegar to sell." Rinpoche placed his luggage on his knees. With his body size, it was extremely depressing to sit in this kind of car with a suitcase on top of it. However, if he were to place the suitcase at the back of the car, there was an 80% chance that there would be nothing left. The Empress nodded her head in agreement. Her eyes swept across the rearview mirror. The people in the car behind them had concealed themselves very well, but the Empress was very sharp. She already knew that there were people following them. There were 5 cars and about 60 people. One of them was a large passenger car, and the people on it were all armed with live ammunition. The distance from the airport to Foggy City was 20 kilometers. Halfway through the journey, the car made a turn somewhere. The people behind immediately raised their vigilance and were on guard. If the two of them jumped out of the car, they would attack immediately. Fortunately, what they were worried about didn't happen. The car successfully entered the encirclement. Suddenly, the many cars behind stopped and blocked the road behind them. This was a spacious area surrounded by plains and hills. The scenery was pretty good, but there wasn't even a forest. This was the most suitable place for an ambush on this road. They were most worried that the other party would enter the city and engage in street fighting with them. Suddenly, a ball of fire exploded on the ground, and the advancing car flew into the air and rolled. They didn't know whether all the cars had crashed into bombs at that time or whether there were landmines buried in the encirclement. In any case, the car suddenly exploded. However, just as the fire lit up, the entire car shed suddenly burst open. Rinpoche and the Empress had already disappeared. The target is moving. The target isn't in the car. Search. The target is 100 meters above Point East attack. Rinpoche was dragged by the Empress and floated in the air like a kite. He was still holding the suitcase in his hand. They saw that the space below, which seemed to be empty, seemed to have been torn apart. Vehicles and soldiers suddenly appeared out of thin air, forming an encirclement with the two of them as the center and a radius of 500 meters. Armored vehicles, bunkers, heavy machine guns, and all kinds of new firearms. There were even quite a number of people wearing metal skeletons that exposed most of their bodies and holding 2 heavy machine guns in their hands. Rinpoche's eyes lit up. Was this the latest air projection technology? This thing was pretty good. He actually didn't see anything wrong with it previously. When everyone located the two of them, they were shocked that they actually stayed in the air. However, when they raised their heads to attack without hesitation, the Empress suddenly pulled Rinpoche and crashed down. It was like a comet crashing into Earth. Before the Empress landed, she waved her palm in the air. Immediately, everyone below found it difficult to even stand and panicked. Only those soldiers with exoskeletons could barely stabilize their bodies and attack. However, this little bit of attack didn't cause any trouble for the Empress. Then there was a loud bang. The Empress crashed straight into the middle of the crowd. Soil and gravel exploded, and even people were sent flying. Many people in the air were hit by the flying gravel and looked like sieves. Oh my God. No, impossible. The battle command center in the distance saw the situation earlier than the surrounding troops. A conical pit that was 10 meters deep and 100 meters in diameter appeared in front of them. Everyone couldn't believe their eyes at all. It was completely impossible. They had seen the Earth-class experts in China, and it was completely impossible for them to do this. In fact, according to their calculations, even experts who were more powerful than Earth-class experts would lose their fighting strength after a round of attacks. The scene in front of them was completely out of their expectations. However, before they could give any instructions, the Empress disappeared. Not good. Just as this thought arose in everyone's mind, the scene from just now appeared in another place. The Empress's figure merely swayed a few times, and almost all the soldiers lying in ambush here were annihilated. There were also a few large pits on the ground. Stop. Rinpoche's face was deathly pale. He shouted at the Empress and then started to vomit. A few minutes later, there were only a few large pits and a pile of human bodies scattered everywhere. Most of them were still groaning, and a small number of soldiers who weren't within the attack range had already thrown down their weapons and raised their hands in fear. This wasn't something they could resist at all. They weren't human at all. In addition to these, there was also a pile of vomit left at the scene. The two of them had already disappeared. Come. Miao Shu Wu. Come. Chapter 1103. It was indeed an unlucky year. He caught a cold and had a fever in Shanghai and had to travel to Shenyang for a few hours to get home. He slept for more than 20 hours and finally recovered. He worked hard to write his story. The pretty boy from the Empress's family had come to life and was writing his story. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 1104. What's her speed? About 500 meters per second. Her physical strength exceeds the speed of sound. Her physical strength is comparable to that of steel. Her impact has to be at least 500,000 tons to achieve the same effect. If our army were to face her, there's no chance of winning in a complex environment. She's too fast, and her destructive power is at the level of a super heavy artillery. Look here, when she rushed down, she faced the bullet and only protected number 2 behind her. Her reaction speed and dynamic vision can completely capture the trajectory of the bullet and dodge it. Of course, this is inevitable. Without such a reaction speed and dynamic vision, she can't support her high-speed movement. Here, she waved her hand and blocked the bullet without suffering any damage. Her body can withstand the damage of standard weapons, but the upper limit is currently difficult to measure. She blocked it, which means her head is still a weak point. I'm not sure. Just like a child throwing a stone, it won't cause any damage, but ordinary people will also prevent being hit in the head. Somewhere in China, in a huge space, countless people were busy analyzing everything on the screen. From the screen, it could be seen that the sources were a satellite high in the sky and 2 cameras at the scene. Is this the so-called spirit wheel expert? According to calculations, a spirit wheel expert shouldn't be this powerful. Unless it's a weapon of mass destruction, it's difficult for conventional weapons to cause fatal damage to the other party. Somewhere in a very simple room. Unfortunately, such a powerful force is not under the control of the country. Such a powerful person has completely surpassed human beings and is not something we can control. There is no power in this world that can balance her. The current situation is not necessarily a bad thing. That's true. I was too greedy. I'll stick to the previous plan. I hope it won't be too big. It's not a bad thing to make a scene. An ambush had turned into a complete defeat. It was as if the enemy had no power to resist at all. Hundreds of troops were completely defeated in just a few seconds. The death toll accounted for 10%, but the injured accounted for 70%. However, what frightened them even more was that the power shown by the Empress was completely irresistible. For the first time, the Rising Sun City knew what kind of trouble it had provoked. It was completely different from what they had thought before. Have you found their location? Found it, they're in Hammersmith. They're too fast. Their target is Buckingham Palace? Quick, notify Buckingham Palace that the Queen needs to leave. Also inform the Prime Minister. Fog Capital. The command center of this operation was in chaos, especially after the target's intentions were discovered. In fact, the situation was completely out of their control from the very beginning. What happened next was only natural. Especially after the two of them entered the city, they were completely at a loss. They could not think of a way to deal with it. He definitely wouldn't be able to beat him. The ambush circle was set up in advance. Nearly 1,000 elite troops, including a large group of exoskeleton soldiers, only lasted for a few seconds. Now that the other party had entered the city, what should they do? A small army was no match for the enemy. Moreover, if the Hua nation could analyze it, they could also analyze it. Ordinary weapons were completely ineffective. Unless the enemy was confined to a certain area and used large-scale destruction or weapons of mass destruction, it would be possible. However, the results were still uncertain. However, first of all, the opponent's speed was too fast, and it was difficult to limit the opponent's range of movement. Second, they were in the fog capital. For a time, from the Prime Minister to the military to the headquarters, all the departments that knew about this operation were in chaos. The enemy's goal doesn't seem to be Buckingham Palace. The enemy's speed has slowed down. Suddenly a voice rang out. Show the enemy's situation. The images in the air all turned into two people walking on the side of the road. Their expressions were relaxed and natural, as if nothing had happened just now. However, with their footsteps, all the water pipes on the side of the road exploded, cracks began to appear on the ground and the surface of the buildings, and even the ground was shaking as if there was an earthquake. In the buildings around them, countless people were screaming and running out in panic. They're going to destroy the fog capital. We must stop them. A low and trembling voice rang out. Many people cast their eyes over. Lieutenant General Claire, the commander of this operation, was also one of the famous hawks. This operation was planned by the hawks in the army and the government. It was because of them that things turned out like this. Although everyone present was a soldier, it was inevitable that some people would feel afraid. Some people felt that the enemy couldn't fight, and some people were opposed to this joint operation with the United States. At this moment, hearing his voice, many people turned their gazes over. Their gazes were filled with all sorts of complicated emotions, and the most obvious one was, how do we stop him? Now that the other party had entered the fog capital, how could they stop them? Mobilize a large number of troops in the fog capital? Or bombard the city with missiles? And their targets were just two Chinese people? It's getting a little boring. The Empress and Rinpochen walked on a street. With every step they took, the force would spread from their feet to the surroundings. It was chaos in the background. The crowd was screaming in shock and pedestrians were running around. Let's take a walk. It's rare for us to come out. The last time we traveled abroad. Come to think of it, it was decades ago. Rinpochen held the Empress with one hand and his suitcase with the other. I mean, what I'm doing now is very boring. The Empress almost yawned. What she was doing now was like stepping on ants. It might be interesting for Honeysuckle, but she wouldn't do it. She would only eat the ants. For an adult, it was very boring. I'm putting pressure on them so that they can be more tactful. Rinpochen actually felt that it was pretty boring, but he still had to do what he was doing now. If they didn't want to see a dilapidated fog capital that was close to being in ruins. In fact, the Empress hadn't really done anything yet. She had only caused a small disturbance. If she really wanted to make it bigger, she could go to a more prosperous place like Oxford Street. The Empress could completely turn that place into ruins in a short period of time. Of course, even if they didn't do this, those people would come forward and think of a way to give in. However, it would drag on a little longer, or some people who didn't know what power was would continue to court death. As for going directly to where the Queen or the Prime Minister was, it wasn't necessary. The effect wouldn't be any better than now. For an old and powerful country, only when they truly saw power and felt pain would they learn to humble themselves and remain in awe. But how did you do it? Rinpochen looked down at the Empress's feet. There was nothing wrong with the area 2 meters in front of them, but there seemed to be an earth dragon twisting behind them. It's just a small trick. Practice more and you'll get better. Do you want to learn? The Empress looked at him. I've told you to practice more. I'm just curious. I didn't see you practicing. This was what Rinpochen found most strange. He would admit that eating, sleeping, and hitting Daodu could increase his strength. However, could skills also increase naturally? The Empress raised her head and said faintly, I'm practicing in my dreams. The Empress didn't look good and asked, Are you doubting me? I'm saying that I'm so envious. However, your majesty is so rare that I can't even be envious. Come. Miao Shu Wu Kam. Chapter 1105. Stop them no matter what method you use. Don't be too forceful. I don't agree. We're the empire where the sun never sets and we can't surrender to these two people. We will become the laughingstock of the world. This isn't surrender. And what solution do you have? I request that we deploy snipers. We might be able to kill them. I object. This is playing with fire. The strength of the other party has already proven that they aren't human. We don't need to get into such big trouble. Precisely because of this, we can't let them continue to exist. Their existence is a threat to all the countries. What did the United States say? They want to continue the operation. That's impossible. We can't afford this loss. I agree with Sir Alec. Now that we have reached this point, we should try again. In various offices, the debate continued through the projection communications. Everyone felt their scalps go numb as they looked at the images displayed on the projection. This was the fog capital. If this continued, everyone would be in big trouble. No one could bear this responsibility, including the Prime Minister. All of them would be fired. They would become sinners of the rising sun city. The only debate now was how to stop them. Soon, a preliminary opinion was reached, and the Eagle faction once again gained the upper hand. For decades, the empire had been declining, and too many people wanted to change the current situation and restore its glory. Whether these two people were captured alive or dead, they could give the Eagle faction a chance to regain their glory as long as the laboratory could study the secrets of their strength. Besides, they didn't want these people, who were like nuclear weapons, to exist in China. I'm tired of it. The Empress yawned. Now that the water pipes had burst, the ground and buildings had cracked, and it had happened 30 meters behind the Empress. Otherwise, the chaotic crowd would have made her feel irritated. Currently, the streets were filled with chaotic pedestrians. Many of them were stunned, and many of them were using a small device on their arm to record everything at the scene. They thought that there was an earthquake and ran out in panic, but the slight tremors on the ground would soon stop. However, if someone ran in the direction of Rinpochen and the Empress or looked in that direction, they would find that this earthquake-like tremor was actually limited to a certain range and was constantly moving. It was as if there was a huge creature moving below. I'm hungry. The Empress stopped and turned to look at Rinpochen. All right, let's go eat. Rinpochen laughed. In fact, there were times when the Empress behaved like a child. Of course, it wasn't that she was childish, but that she did as she pleased. Regardless of whether it was on Earth or in Deyo, she was well-deserved to be at the top of the food chain. There was no reason for her to care about what others thought. She would only be more accommodating to him. They had been married for several years. Including the time they had spent on Earth, they had long passed the 7-year itch. However, there were not many changes in their relationship. They had only become more natural. It was also more natural when he hit people. Rinpochen raised his head and looked around to see if there was any place that seemed to serve good food. Although he had no expectations for the food in this country. For the Chinese, the most famous food in this country should be the Stargazy pie, die with regrets. Point 1 is in position. Target detected. Point 2 is in position. Point 3, the Empress realized that someone was staring at her, but she ignored him. Until a gunshot rang out in the distance. The movement of the Empress's arm was almost invisible, and there was a long warhead in her hand. However, this was only the beginning. In an instant, the Empress's arm seemed to disappear. When it reappeared, there were 18 bullets in her hand. The bullets fell to the ground with a crash. Bullets from a sniper rifle. Rinpochen looked down and immediately knew what it was. In fact, he had already sensed that he was being targeted. However, with the Empress around, he didn't need to worry. He just needed to focus on finding a place to eat. However, the Empress's face began to turn gloomy. She wanted to eat, but these people were disturbing her. I wanted to let them go first. The Empress's voice was like sub-zero ice, making people shiver. They don't appreciate it. They still don't understand your power. Rinpochen took the opportunity to fan the flames and provoke the Empress's anger. This was a subconscious reaction and had nothing to do with one's character. Just take it as it is. In the next second, the Empress dragged Rinpochen and disappeared. 2 seconds later, they appeared on the roof of a building. Before the sniper could react, a foot descended from the sky and stepped on his head, following which he was turned into minced meat. Even the roof of the building was smashed, and the corpses on it disappeared without a trace. Then the Empress stepped on the air, grabbed a helicopter that was hovering in the air with one hand, and threw it down to the street below. There were explosions, flames, and a chaotic crowd. Then a second, a third. 18 snipers were trampled to death, 18 roofs and 6 helicopters were thrown down. The broken roofs, large chunks of concrete, and helicopters that were thrown down from the sky turned the neighborhood into hell. It was as if they were in the center of a war. Everywhere, there were people fleeing in all directions, screaming and crying. Only then did the Empress feel that she had vented a little bit of her anger. I'm even hungrier now. The Empress decided to continue venting after eating. She had a terrible impression of this place. No matter who it was, they would be surrounded by a swarm of mosquitoes as soon as they got off the plane. Not long after, they were targeted by another swarm of mosquitoes. It was the same to replace the mosquitoes with flies. Is this what you want? Let's talk to them. Looking at the scene on the screen, the bullets that were thrown all over the ground, and the Empress stepping on the air as if she was walking on an invisible staircase. It was as if the gravity of Earth didn't exist on her body. Some people finally knew that they had completely failed this time. What was left was how to talk to the other party. Of course, after trying again, they understood that they would have to pay a higher price. However, they wouldn't be satisfied if they didn't try. In fact, if it wasn't for the lack of time, they would have tried using poison or other methods. However, they were afraid that before they could do anything, Fog City would already be in ruins. Ren Baqin and the Empress swept through 23 cake shops and ate everything, including butter, cheese and other raw ingredients. In any case, they didn't reject anything as long as it was sweet. Even though the Empress wasn't full, she wasn't that hungry. Fighting was very exhausting. Even though the Empress wasn't fighting just now, she had consumed a lot of energy. "Hi, I'm Luca Mars. I think we can talk." When they entered the 24th cake shop, they saw a blond man in his 40s who was wearing an exquisite suit. Ren Baqin raised his eyebrows. He was slightly surprised that the other party would actually wait for him here. However, on second thought, their purpose was so obvious. They had probably sent many people to many cake shops, and this was only one of them. The truth was just as Ren Baqin thought. "Do you want to go out alive or as a corpse?" Ren Baqin merely glanced at him and walked past him. "We can let them out." Ren Baqin was expressionless, but there was some ridicule in his eyes. "Aren't you guys thinking too simply? Come. Wonderful book house." Chapter 1106. "Mr. Ren, I think we can have a talk." Luca Mals turned to Ren Baqin and sounded very sincere. He had no choice but to be sincere. Right now, everyone was worried that they would cause damage to the Fog capital. With the strength of that woman, even a little damage would cause tens of billions of losses. This was one of the world's economic centers. Even a little damage would cause hundreds of millions of losses. If serious damage and riots were caused, the losses would be incalculable. Many people were now cursing the ancestors of the Eagle faction. If they hadn't provoked this incident, how could it have caused such a big problem? Of course, they didn't expect that the target wouldn't resort to any other means and would fight them directly. In this era, who would use such a tough, domineering, and merciless approach when facing a country? No matter how deep their foundation was, they wouldn't dare to do so. For a country, no matter how strong an individual was, he or she would be powerless in the face of a national machine. At times, the power of an army was greater than anything else. If a country was ruthless enough to do something, no one could resist. This was true even for Citigroup, which controlled the government. However, this was only true for ordinary people. It was completely ineffective when facing the two of them. The short attack of the Empress and the few streets that she had walked in the Fog capital had proved this point perfectly. This kind of strength had completely exceeded their expectations and made them completely unable to resist for a while. In particular, the other party was now in the heart of this country, the Fog capital. Instead of rescuing them, they brazenly went to the Fog capital, which was also unexpected. In terms of destructive power alone, the Empress's destructive power was enough to make anyone feel terrified. This was the current situation. The entire empire had to make peace with the two of them and give in to them. No matter how humiliating it was, they had to do so because they couldn't afford the consequences. "We have some misunderstandings with the two of you. I think there's a time to clear up all misunderstandings. Why don't we both sit down and talk calmly? Both of you must have come to our country this time to do something, right? Maybe we can help," Luca Mals continued. His words directly pointed out the purpose of Ren Baqin and the Empress's visit. They wanted to use this opportunity to sit down and talk. At this moment, the Empress waved her hand and said, "I want all the cakes." When it came to desserts, the Empress was never picky. She never picked one dessert or didn't want one dessert. Instead, she just bought everything. "Yours truly. All mine." "Don't disturb me while I'm eating," the Empress said as she found a place to sit down. Her eyes were filled with anticipation. Although Ren Baqin said that the food here wasn't delicious, the desserts were still pretty good. Ren Baqin simply sat at another table to avoid disturbing the Empress's eating mood. "You can't make the decision," Ren Baqin replied. He wasn't prepared to let them off easily, nor was he prepared to make peace so easily. "Madame Ning also has some other conditions that aren't too excessive. I think I can make some promises. Can I sit down?" Luca Mars smiled. The higher-ups had already given him some authority. What he needed to do was to minimize his losses as much as possible within the scope of his authority. If the other party could take out what the higher-ups wanted, he would be willing to pay even more. Moreover, he also believed that the other party would make a wise choice. No matter how strong they were still facing a country. Even if they had grasped the sore spot, it was only temporary. Ren Baqin grinned. There was an indescribable meaning in his smile. It seemed to be sarcasm, but there was also some other meaning. This kind of smile on this fierce face was exceptionally uncomfortable. Luca Mars also knew what the other party meant. It was indeed humiliating for a country, one of the most powerful in the world, to actually give in to an individual. Furthermore, the other party had the right to be proud. However, this wasn't important at this moment. I can sell you some things, Rinpoche said with an indescribable smile. Luca Mars was shocked when he heard this. Then he was overjoyed. He didn't expect this to be the first thing the other party said. Could it be that he had gained more this time? If he could really get what the country wanted from Rinpoche, it would be worth it no matter what the other party wanted. He didn't doubt that Rinpoche had something important in his hands. By now, he had already found out that the martial arts of China were likely to originate from him. Furthermore, he knew a thing or two about the strength of the experts in China. They couldn't be compared to that woman. It was like the difference between an ant and an elephant. It could be seen that the other party had the most precious thing in his hands, enough to make anyone in any country drool. However, he still had some doubts in his heart. Why did the other party skip this conflict and directly talk about a deal? Normal people wouldn't talk like this. There seemed to be something wrong here. As I said before, we have a little misunderstanding, but this isn't important. We can completely compensate you, Mr. Rin. Since Mr. Rin has other ideas, that couldn't be better. Please speak. How much is that building worth? Rinpoche suddenly raised his hand and pointed to a building in the distance. Although the building wasn't a landmark, it was the tallest building that could be seen from this angle. Luca Mars knew which building Rinpoche was talking about at a glance. He was a little confused, but he still said, the HSYY building, 37 stories high, covers an area of... The current market price is about £180 million. How about I sell it to you? It only costs $150 million, Rinpoche said. Luca Mars was slightly stunned. Didn't that building belong to the HSYY insurance company? He thought that the other party wanted to buy it. Rinpoche calmly explained, that building, including the company and employees in it, is worth far more than $180 million, right? If that building suddenly collapses, I'm afraid the loss will be far more than that. Why don't you buy it? I can guarantee that the building will be fine. You will spend less money and save a lot of losses. This can be considered the best of both worlds. Isn't it a good deal? Luca Mars's pupils shrank and his eyes widened in shock. Was the other party threatening him? Or was it a blatant threat? It was like someone telling you that your house was worth $1 million. If you paid $500,000, I wouldn't blow your house up. Furthermore, the target of the threat was a country. The other party was simply too daring. Luca Mars's expression changed a few times and he forced a smile. Mr. Rin, we are very sincere. I'm also very sincere. Rinpoche smiled to show that he was very kind and sincere in making a deal with the other party. The foggy city is very big and there are many buildings. It's too troublesome to trade one by one. Can we change the method and trade a street? Or a district? If you want, we can trade the entire foggy city. We can even expand to the whole of the rising sun city. Come. Miao Shu Wu. Chapter 1107. The conversation between the two of them was completely exposed to many people. At this time, in the office at the back, more than one person was cursing and smashing whatever they could get their hands on. These damn people from China were simply unscrupulous. This time, Luca Mars couldn't laugh at all. He stared at the man in front of him, trying to figure out what he was thinking. However, all he saw was a contemptuous and sarcastic smile. Mr. Rin, you are very humorous, but we still want to have a good talk. This is the rising sun city, the fog capital, and we are one of the most powerful countries in the world with great power. It is undeniable that you are very powerful, but this doesn't mean that you can do anything unscrupulously. Rinpoche looked at him with a smile on his face. That's why I said you can't make the decision. Or can we talk to your queen? Or the prime minister? I don't know much about your country and don't know who has more say. Do you have any good suggestions? Luca Mars's face turned green as he cursed in his heart. The earplug in his left ear kept sending instructions to the people behind him. Everyone who was paying attention to this conversation was furious. This damn person from China was simply too crazy and unreasonable. Did he really think that he was invincible? If it were someone else, they would have shown him their strength. However, they still had to suppress their anger. The current situation was that they had to talk and appease the other party and couldn't just break up with him. I think I can be a representative and make some promises. Why don't you listen to our conditions? Not interested. Rinpoche spread his hands and didn't look like he was going to make peace. In any case, he was here to cause trouble. Although the Empress was powerful in the past, she couldn't be reckless. Now she was completely unscrupulous. If she had the ability, she could throw missiles and nuclear bombs at the fog capital. Other than that, there was no threat at all. Furthermore, he could return to Dayo at any time and come again in half a month. Don't you care about Madame Ning's safety at all? At this time, Luca Malls wasn't the only one talking to Ren Bachien. There were many people behind him who were analyzing the situation. There were experts in China, psychology, and many other think tanks. After all, this was a nation that could mobilize large amounts of resources at any time. At this moment, a group of people was analyzing his expressions and words to analyze his character, thoughts, and other aspects. Although Ren Bachien was very tough at the moment, according to their analysis, his ultimate goal was to negotiate peace. This could be seen from the fact that even though he and the Empress destroyed 5 streets, they didn't cause too much damage or casualties. With the strength they had displayed before, if they wanted to, they could have caused much more damage. It would not be a problem to destroy a building. Therefore, his current toughness was only for the sake of better negotiation in the future. The problem now was how to bring the topic back on track. Ren Bachien extended a finger and said, "You can only threaten me with one person." Then he revealed a sinister smile on his face. "And I can use the entire fog capital to threaten you." When he said this, Ren Bachien thought of a sentence, "All of you are already surrounded by me." That was what he was doing now. In fact, all of you have been kidnapped by the Empress alone. The expressions of the people who were watching through the screen changed. It had to be said that the feeling of a city and a country being threatened by a single person was terrible. Such a joke actually happened to them. Following this, Luca Malls kept trying to bring the topic back on track, but Ren Bachien was stubborn and didn't buy it at all. When the Empress was almost done eating everything, Ren Bachien smiled and left the cake shop with the Empress. When Luca Malls chased after them, they had already disappeared. In just a few minutes, they appeared directly in one of the most famous areas of the fog capital, Oxford Street, which attracted tens of millions of tourists every year. Naturally, Ren Bachien didn't know where this place was. To be honest, he didn't study this country much before coming here. In his opinion, as long as the other party didn't throw a nuclear bomb at his head, he didn't care. If there was really a warrior who dared to throw a nuclear bomb at his head, it would be impossible. Secondly, he and the Empress could leave at any time. Ren Bachien just felt that this place was more lively. With the appearance of the two of them, everyone in the empire felt like their heads were about to explode. Then, like a moving earth dragon, wherever the two of them went, the ground and buildings trembled. Cracks appeared on the buildings and the ground, water pipes exploded, and glass shattered. It was as if a natural disaster had occurred. Countless people fled from the buildings on both sides, screaming and panicking everywhere. It was like the end of the world. Seeing this scene, everyone in the empire felt their scalps go numb. This was really like a walking natural disaster that was completely unstoppable. The destructive power and threat were too great. At this time, even many of the Eagle faction regretted provoking these two lunatics. Countless emergency communications were sent out from various offices and connected to the other side of the ocean. It's a big deal. An old man sat in his office and looked at everything that was happening on the other side of the ocean. He sighed slightly. This was the power of a super expert. Those guys have given in and want us to help persuade them. We have made concessions in many areas and can talk in detail after persuading them to stop. They can't wait now, an old man said with a smile while drinking tea. This time we have benefited from it and picked up a bargain. The two of them looked like they were watching a good show. They were only missing melon seeds, watermelon, and drinks. However, it was almost the same now. They were missing fruits, tea, and a pot of wine. Then they would be the perfect spectators. The damage is greater than I expected. An old man sighed slightly. I thought that such power was temporary, but I didn't expect it to be so effortless. Anyone would have to find a way to stop them. After thinking for a while, he said, "Indeed, we can't go too far. After all, peace is the mainstream. However, it's not easy to take advantage of them. They have to be willing to let go first. Can you contact them now?" "I can't. The people from the embassy are already approaching. At most, they can just show their faces and express the country's intentions. As for what they do, it's up to them." The two of them had only walked half a street when countless riot police appeared in front of them. Several men in suits stopped in front of them and said, "Please stop for a moment. The Prime Minister is rushing over and wants to talk to you face to face." At this moment, both the royal family and the Prime Minister couldn't sit still anymore. They had to stop the two of them even if it meant risking their lives to appear in front of them. Renbacheng grinned and pulled the Empress. The two of them disappeared again, leaving only Yao Yao's words, "Have you decided to buy this city?" The people from the Empire of the Unsetting Sun saw this scene and frantically searched for the whereabouts of the two of them. In just 10 minutes, the fog capital had lost at least a few billion yuan, causing a huge panic. This time, the panic caused was even more serious than in the west of the fog capital. If they continued to cause trouble, the consequences would be unimaginable. A few minutes later, the two of them appeared in the financial city. There were many banks, stock exchanges, gold markets, and other financial institutions gathered here. Come. Miao Shu Wu. Chapter 1108. Earthquake? 2 hours ago, I just heard from Alvin that there was an earthquake and now it's you, but I don't feel anything here. Did you guys participate in the filming of some movie? Lionel stood at the window that overlooked half the block and looked down. The image floating beside him showed a chaotic scene. The fire hydrant on the street was nowhere to be seen, and water columns were spraying high into the sky. The ground was covered with cracks of different sizes, and there were chaotic pedestrians everywhere. Noisy shouts and all kinds of messy sounds were mixed together. There seemed to be a traffic accident not far away, and a few cars had collided. Okay, I got it. Find an empty place to stay first. Maybe the aftershock affected your place. I'll go find you right away. Keep in touch. I was just talking to a client and didn't notice any shaking. The street here is also very calm. It wasn't completely calm. Although nothing happened, many people ran to the street to look around. Lionel turned off the phone and looked up. A group of flying motorcycles passed in front of his eyes, and a large number of helicopters and flying motorcycles were hovering in the sky in the distance. People from the army and the police station. It seemed that something had happened. Lionel clicked on the projection beside him, and it immediately showed a series of news and pictures. Looks like there was an earthquake. I don't know where it came from, but the aftershock actually affected this place. It seems to be in the west? Lionel glanced at it and thought to himself. Although he was fine here, he still had to go see Alvin. He was scared out of his wits. Lionel put on his coat, said goodbye to his colleagues, and quickly walked out of the office into the elevator. There were already 6 people in the elevator. They were all employees of different companies upstairs, and some of them looked worried. Lionel nodded slightly at them and stood quietly to the side. His gaze stayed on the floors from the 16th floor to the 6th floor. Then the elevator suddenly shook violently. The elevator seemed to have hit the outer wall, and then there was a sound of metal rubbing against each other. A woman in the elevator suddenly screamed, and the others also stood unsteadily and exclaimed. Their expressions changed drastically. What happened? The earthquake affected this place? Lionel was also shocked. He hurriedly pressed the buttons for each floor, trying to stop the elevator. If something happened in the elevator, it would be dangerous. Fortunately, nothing major happened. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor and Lionel rushed out. He almost collided with the crowd that was running out of the office. He then squeezed through the crowd and ran out of the building through the fire escape. As he ran, Lionel could still feel the tremors under his feet. He could even see the cracks on the walls. It wasn't until he ran out of the building that he felt slightly relieved. He was already covered in cold sweat. If he hadn't run out just now, it would have been too dangerous. However, the chaos continued and became more and more intense. Run, the building is collapsing. Someone shouted. Lionel's heart skipped a beat, and he subconsciously ran in a certain direction. The chaotic flow of people made it difficult for him to run fast, and his attention was attracted by a building not far away that was full of cracks. The building was falling apart and the building was collapsing. Chunks of concrete were falling from the building. Damn it, why can't we use the helicopter? In an office, a woman wearing a badge slammed the table and shouted. Something big must have happened. There has been news of earthquakes in many places, but this isn't an earthquake. The earthquakes happened at the same time and didn't spread gradually. Look at the footage. This chaos is caused by something moving underground. Underground people? Prehistoric monsters? Mutated creatures? This is big news that can shock the world. We have to use the helicopter. I want to use the helicopter more than you do, but unfortunately martial law has been imposed. You know what this means. The man behind the desk crossed his fingers and looked regretful. We have the right to report. The people have the right to know. Yes, but the air is under martial law. You can go by car. The woman gritted her teeth for a while before turning around and leaving angrily. The man shook his head. He knew that this was big news, but now that the entire fog city was under air control, there had to be a lot of things that no one knew about. Even if they were reporters, they couldn't report everything. With one hand in his pocket and the other dragging his suitcase, Rinpoche turned to look at the collapsing building behind him. I didn't expect there to be shoddy construction here. According to the power used by the Empress, there shouldn't be any buildings that collapsed. This could only mean that there was something wrong with the building itself, and it was detonated by the Empress's power. He didn't know how many casualties there were, but it probably wasn't a small number. The people of the Empire of the Never-Setting Sun were probably going to go crazy. Rinpoche didn't stop walking as he pondered. A piece of collapsed concrete drew an arc in the air and went straight for the back of Rinpoche's head. When it was about 10 centimeters away, the tip of a spear suddenly pierced through the back of Rinpoche's head and then quietly retracted. Lionel, who was not far away, opened his mouth wide and looked lifeless. He wanted to warn the Chinese man in front of him, but what did he see? Was that person an alien? You two, what are you trying to do? Do you know what you have done? A few men in suits jumped down from the flying motorcycles in the air and stopped in front of Rinpoche and the Empress. Their faces were distorted and full of anger. Is it illegal to walk a dog? Rinpoche and the Empress's indifference was extremely conspicuous in the panicked crowd. The Empress stood there and thought for a while. She turned to look at Rinpoche and kicked him out without warning. He knocked down countless pedestrians and many of them directly spat out blood. When she kicked him, she didn't forget to snatch back the suitcase that Rinpoche was dragging. Bastard. The Empress was annoyed. Rinpoche was even more annoyed than the Empress. What was going on? Why did she hit him? Was there any justice in this world? He ran back from the corner of the street aggressively and looked at the Empress, who was staring at him angrily. Rinpoche suddenly felt that being kicked by his wife wasn't a big deal. Please stop. The ordinary people are innocent and many people have already shed blood. The Prime Minister is looking for you. Let's have a good talk. The smooth internal fight between the Empress and the Empress just now shocked the men in suits. One of the men spoke with a pleading tone. Many people who knew what was going on were really shocked. The Empress's strength was too outrageous. If they were allowed to go on like this, it could be imagined that after today, there would be countless casualties in the entire fog capital. Chapter 1109. Liang Qing, who was 48 years old, looked like he was in his early 30s at this time. Sitting in the flying car looking down the window, he could see the chaotic crowd and the cracked ground below. He was thinking about the two people he was going to see in a while. Number 1, the Empress. Number 2, the gate. He had heard of these two people when he was young. At that time he was still in Shanghai and had just started working. The old man at home only said one sentence: don't provoke them, hide from them. With his family background, he actually had to hide from them. At that time he was quite unconvinced. Later, when he learned what these two people had done, he was somewhat glad that he was young and aggressive at that time, but he didn't meet them. Otherwise, the unlucky ones would definitely not be them. Two people who regarded human life as worthless grass. If the strength of an Earth-level expert was at the top of the sky, then they were the sky. In this era of technology, no one could match their personal strength. The entire base of the United States was turned upside down by one person, and the other person was even stronger. Inhumanly strong. Looking at the chaos on the streets below, the other party hadn't even made a move yet. It was unknown what means they used to cause such great damage in the city. It was simply a walking nuclear bomb. It was a big killing weapon wherever it was placed. Ambassador, they have stopped. Shall we rush there now? A military officer with a heroic appearance beside him asked after receiving the message from the communicator. And Liang Qing softly responded. He had come for this matter. The Rising Sun City admitted defeat, but the other party didn't want to let them go so easily. But it was not a good thing to continue like this. Now that they had stopped, it seemed that they could talk. One person against a country, Liang Qing whispered. The military officer deeply agreed. The military officer of the embassy was also a master, and he had always been a little arrogant. But after seeing what happened today, that arrogance had long disappeared. There was always someone better than you. This sentence was not appropriate. It could be said that there was always someone better than you. There was always someone better than you in the world. Just what he saw now, the masters in the country who had eyes on the top of their heads could not be compared with these two people. They were simply not the same species. Shattering a wall with a punch and shattering a piece of ground with a stomp of a few meters was not impossible, but that was the extent of it. But the other party didn't do anything at all. They just walked past and there was not a piece of intact space behind them. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes today, he wouldn't have believed that such power existed in the world. The people of the Rising Sun City did not believe it either. There were 6 duct fan-type propellers on top. The sound was low and it took off and landed vertically. It was electrically powered and had no wings. Its speed was pretty good, reaching more than 200 kilometers per hour. However, those who could afford it didn't like it. The compartment was too small and uncomfortable, far inferior to some commercial helicopters. The only advantage was that it was much easier to take off and land than a helicopter. 3 Chinese men came down from the flying car. The one in front looked to be in his 30s. He had a square face, combed hair, wore glasses and wore a suit. He first looked at the collapsed building before walking toward them. "Mr. Ren, Miss Chi, I'm Liang Cheng, the ambassador of our country's embassy in the Rising Sun City. If the two of you encounter any problems here, you can tell me. If I can do it, I will not refuse. Even if I can't do it, I can also ask my country for instructions." Liang Cheng walked up to the two of them and first made his position clear. His words were very polite. "Thank you." Ren Bachien got up and shook hands with them to show his goodwill. This time the country did a good job. Liang Cheng's words were also very nice, making it impossible for people to feel bad about him. The Empress looked up at him and said, "If the envoys of other countries were as clever as you, even if they were ugly, they wouldn't have been chopped up by me as fertilizer." There was a hint of appreciation in her words. Liang Cheng secretly remembered these words, smiled at them and said, "This isn't the place to talk. Gentlemen, this is not the place to talk. Shall we go somewhere else?" Liang Cheng looked at Ren Bachien and asked for his opinion. Ren Bachien stopped and was ready to settle this matter. However, he wanted what he wanted, took what he wanted, and beat up what he wanted. They didn't go to 10 Downing Street or the Military Intelligence Department. Instead, they went directly to the embassy. Ren Bachien was embarrassed to tear down the place, probably because he felt that they didn't talk properly later. In the conference room, Ren Bachien and the Empress unceremoniously sat at the head of the table. The 3 parties sat in 3 different directions. Liang Cheng was closer to them, but he kept a distance. After all, he was here to help mediate. The 3 parties sat there without saying a word. Ren Bachien lowered his head and rested while the Empress was in a daze. "Ahem, there was a misunderstanding today that alarmed the two of you." "Ah, misunderstanding?" Ren Bachien raised his eyelids and sneered. Harold Belfort's expression didn't change. "However, the two of you have also caused us huge casualties and losses. So far, the number of casualties has exceeded 1,500, and the direct losses are tens of billions. Do the two of you have anything to say?" Harold Belfort continued to speak as he looked at the 2 men. He meant to point out the losses suffered by the Rising Sun City first and then see what conditions Ren Bachien and Belfort wanted to propose. "You talk a lot of nonsense." Ren Bachien's words made the faces of Harold Balfour and his entourage change. "Tell me, how much of the fog capital do you want?" Ren Bachien continued to sneer. "We are very sincere." "I hope the two of you will show your sincerity as well," Harold Belfort said. "Bah, did I beg you to negotiate with me?" Ren Bachien had a ferocious look on his face as he replied, "I didn't provoke anyone. Just as I got off the plane, I was bombarded with guns and cannons. Now, you want to beg for mercy because you can't win? Why don't you guys eat the shit you shit back?" Liang Cheng's eyebrows did not move, but in his heart, he thought to himself, sure enough, as the rumors say, he is a tyrannical person. But the Rising Sun City also deserved it. If you work for the United States, you have to be prepared to be beaten back. If he was in their shoes, he would also have the same attitude. Let's watch the show first. After all, I'm just a support. Cell phone terminal M. Ad-free new 81. Chapter 11:10. Ren Bachien's merciless words made the faces of the people of the Empire of the Unsetting Sun turn red and blue veins pop out. It was unknown how many people smashed their cups. This was especially so for those from the Eagle faction. Hearing the voice coming from the screen, all of their faces contorted, and they wanted nothing more than to tear the person in the screen to shreds. Harold Balfour's hands trembled a little as he lowered his head slightly. Then he raised his head and looked straight at Ren Bachien. "Madame Ning is on her way here and isn't hurt. In view of the impact this misunderstanding has had on the two of you, we are willing to offer £5 billion worth of property as compensation for this misunderstanding." After that, no matter what the two of you want to do in the Rising Sun City, as long as it is not against the law, we can give the two of you the green light. The two of you will not be disturbed again. Harold Belfour knew that based on the absolute strength the two had displayed, it would be difficult for them to be satisfied with 5 billion. However, this was just a start. As long as the other party was willing to question this number, he could raise this number even higher, which would open a breakthrough point. Otherwise, based on the current situation, it would be very difficult to continue this conversation. As for Ning Kaichen, it would be a lie to say that she was unharmed. However, that didn't matter. As long as they could start peace talks, they could make some concessions in certain aspects and give the other party sufficient compensation. Thinking of this, Harold Balfour also felt depressed. As the Prime Minister of the empire where the sun never set, he actually had to lower his head to a person. No matter how this negotiation went, he would be nailed to the pillar of shame in the future. Fortunately, although the matter had caused a huge ruckus, there were not many people who truly knew the situation. For the next 2 hours, Rinpochen mocked and ridiculed the Prime Minister. After all, it wasn't often that he scolded the Prime Minister. With Liang Cheng's occasional interruptions, the two sides finally entered into peace talks. After all, Rinpochen didn't come here to create trouble. As for the price, Rinpochen didn't care about money at all. He still needed some technological information and talents. Rinpochen was prepared to peel off a layer of skin from the other party. For example, he was very interested in the equipment that could change the environment and hide one's whereabouts. The two sides entered the peace talks, but on the other side of the ocean, a group of people was still busy. In one of the offices, images were floating in the air. Behind each image was a man in a suit or military uniform. The Empire of the Unsetting Sun has made peace with those two people. Withdraw the troops that were sent out to put on a show. You've all seen the specific situation. This kind of strength shouldn't belong to humans. The existence of these two people has already affected the balance and stability of the world. I suggest we give up on capturing them and focus on eliminating them. The army doesn't pose much of a threat to them. If we act rashly and fail to eliminate the enemy, we'll definitely invite trouble for ourselves. Even if we don't do anything, this matter is related to us. There's no way they don't know that we are already enemies. Rather than letting them have the initiative, it's better to take it into our own hands. In reality, the Empire of the Unsetting Sun is holding back. The other party is located in the Fog City, so it's impossible for them to use weapons that can cause great damage. If they appear in Gotham City or Washington Manor, we will be like the Empire where the sun never sets, unable to do anything to them. This is too dangerous. I suggest we launch a surprise attack on their way back. No one will be able to escape from an altitude of 10,000 meters. I suggest using space-based and nuclear weapons. Do you want to start a new war? They are too dangerous. Their existence is a huge threat to the entire world. Since he couldn't obtain them, he had to destroy them. It's just that they rarely appear in front of people. We are powerless in China, but this is an opportunity. As long as they are eliminated, the impact can be eliminated through political means and some economic concessions. Can space-based weapons destroy them? The destructive power is sufficient. Their attack speed is close to the speed of light and can't be avoided. Tens of millions of watts of power can instantly create a temperature of thousands of degrees that can even melt steel. They are in the plane, so we can't attack them immediately. The first thing we can damage is the outer shell of the plane, which gives them a chance to escape. That woman has the ability to move quickly in the air. If we miss, it will be difficult for us to aim at her again. Space-based weapons are mainly used for fixed military installations, not to kill mosquitoes. I suggest using nuclear bombs, which have a greater killing range. We can eliminate them instantly and give them no chance to escape. Seconded. I also agree with this plan. Your Excellency, give the order. For the United States. Under the strong pressure of Rinpochen, the members of the Empire of the Unsetting Sun gradually retreated in terms of terms. More than half of the negotiations were completed in the afternoon. In any case, if you don't agree, we will start fighting. At worst, we will destroy the entire fog capital. If you have the ability, do you want to throw a nuclear bomb at your own head? As long as we want to, the royal family and senior officials of the Empire of the Unsetting Sun won't be able to escape. Unless they hide like a mouse in a place that no one knows, no matter how strong their defense is, it will be useless. At that time, the entire country will collapse. The people of the Empire of the Unsetting Sun felt bitter and indescribable. However, a knife was placed on their necks, and they had no choice but to retreat. In the evening, the negotiated terms included more than 100 scientists, including physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, materials science, and aeronautics. They were the talents that Rinpoche urgently needed, the backbone and blood of the country, and couldn't be measured with money. In addition, there were dozens of pieces of information on various technologies and some of the latest equipment that was difficult to buy in China. It had to be said that even though the old powerful countries had declined, they still had some heritage. In addition to the scientists, the value of this information and equipment alone was tens of billions of yuan. That night, Rinpoche saw Ning Kaichen. He looked clean, as if he had just changed his clothes before coming here. His expression was also a little tired, and he looked haggard. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Greetings, Your Highness." Ning Kaichen greeted the two of them. After arriving on Earth, she had completely regarded herself as Rinpoche's subordinate and had nothing to do with Great Xia. "You've worked hard." Rinpoche nodded. "Have you tortured me?" "I haven't slept for many days. Both of you know that without the green pearl, I'm not much different from an ordinary person and have indeed suffered." Ning Kaichen pursed her lips and smiled. "Fortunately, I wasn't tortured. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to hold on." Ning Kaichen had never been an unyielding character. In essence, she wasn't much different from an ordinary person. The reason why she could hold on for so many days was because she trusted the strength of Rinpoche and the Empress. She knew how big the gap between the experts in this world and those in Dayo was. "Tell me about the situation at that time. Although you aren't strong, you shouldn't have been caught so easily, right?" Ning Kaichen recounted the situation at that time. She was caught without any resistance. "After all, I still like my current identity and don't want to give it up." Rinpoche had nothing to say about this. After all, everyone had different pursuits. What Ning Kaichen pursued was this kind of glamorous, eye-catching, and admiring celebrity life. She wouldn't give up easily until the very last step. "Fortunately, after this time, no one should dare to have any ideas about me." Ning Kaichen smiled. She already knew what happened just now. Although the incident happened in the Rising Sun City, the other countries would definitely know the whole story. After all, the incident this time was very big. In the future, she would be famous in all the countries. "However, your identity has been exposed. Even if others don't have any ideas about you, it will be difficult for you to do anything." Rinpoche considered whether to transfer more people over. Although the aboriginals under the Empress were strong, they were too reckless and couldn't do the delicate work in this world. Although those spirit wheel experts couldn't be transferred over easily, their disciples were quite useful. However, it was impossible to let them go back after bringing them over. Another option was to use the manpower in this world. His martial arts center had now blossomed and borne fruit. Although there were no spirit wheel experts, there were still more than 50 earth wheel experts, which was not a small force. Furthermore, they were pure earthlings, so it should be easier to use them. Rinpoche thought for a while and made a plan. Then he would pick some disciples from the martial arts center to work for him. After comforting Ning Kaichen, he let her go back to rest. After all, she was really tired these days. Rinpoche and the Empress stayed in the Rising Sun City for another 2 days. During this time, Rinpoche and Liang Qing got to know each other. Could also be said the other way around. During the negotiations, Liang Qing privately provided Rinpoche with a lot of information about the advanced technology of the empire. Not only did Rinpoche have a need for it, but the nation also had a need for technology and equipment. Through Rinpoche's help, Liang Qing also obtained some extremely urgent things. It could be said that both sides were happy. 2 days later, Rinpoche and the Empress finally embarked on a flight back to Shanghai. This allowed the people of the Rising Sun Empire to breathe a sigh of relief. Although they couldn't wait to skin Rinpoche alive, they could finally be at ease after sending these two fiends away. However, half an hour later, a bright flame exploded over the English Channel, causing many people's expressions to change drastically. Clear the target? There's no possibility of survival under such an attack, and we haven't found any signs of life. Target eliminated. Cell phone terminal M. Ad-free new 81. Chapter 11:11. The Empire of the Unsetting Sun. Harold Belfort was shocked when he received the news. Who did this? After thinking for a moment, it was not necessarily a bad thing if it could be confirmed that the two people were really dead. After all, the Empire had lost a lot of face because of them and had been extorted a lot of resources. What was even more unacceptable was the 100 scientists. If they were really dead, then there would be a lot of wrangling. But even the army could not do anything to those two people. Were they really dead this time? Harold Belfort sat for a long time. His first order was to find out who did it. He did not give such an order. Who was it? One nation. How is this possible? How could this happen? The hands of an old man who had just received the news trembled and the cup fell to the ground. In terms of power, the yield is no less than 10,000 tons. However, no signs of missile launch were detected. Preliminary suspicion is that it was done on the plane, the middle-aged man reported. Are you sure they are dead? No bodies were found. After all, bodies can't be preserved in that kind of explosion. But we have compared the photos in all directions. No one escaped before and after the explosion. Was it done by the Empire of the Unsetting Sun? There is no report yet. But it is very likely. After all, number 1 and number 2 made a big scene in Fog City. It is very likely that the Empire of the Unsetting Sun did this. The old man was silent for a long time. We were careless. What about Ning Kaichen? She came back a day early. Keep an eye on her condition. Yes. Sir, Elder Huang's call, should I answer it? Answer it. An old man appeared in the air and asked as soon as the call was connected, are they on the plane? Confirmed they are on the plane. Liang Qing saw them go up and didn't come down. Are they dead? The old man hesitated for a moment before saying, if they were ordinary people, they would have died. It's hard to say for the two of them. Don't forget that they have the ability to disappear and reappear suddenly. We don't know where the door is and whether they can leave at any time. Even if they had the door with them, it would be difficult for them to survive that kind of explosion, right? Elder Huang said in a low voice. I don't know. Don't forget, we are all ordinary people, but they are not. No one thought that a single person could destroy a city so easily. I thought they would be beheaded. Their power is beyond our understanding. The old man shook his head slightly. The current situation of this matter was still unclear, and further investigation was required. If they really died, the country would suffer a great loss. One had to know that their value was not only in providing cultivation methods, but also in everything that came from that place. If they really died, then this line of connection would be broken, and it was unknown whether there would be a chance to reconnect. What about the dojo? It is a very powerful force, and it is said that there are many secret techniques hidden in the dojo, which are different from the ones we obtained. Apart from that, many people are also eyeing the wealth that he has. Don't move before we confirm that they are dead. I'm afraid some people won't be able to sit still. Suppress it. Anyone who moves at this time is asking for trouble, the old man said in a deep voice. Even in China, not everyone thought the same way. However, their side had always been suppressing the other side. Number 1 and number 2's powerful strength also made them not dare to act rashly. If those two people really died, there would definitely be people who would not sit still. But now, before the situation was clear, they had to be suppressed. Normally, they would appear every 7 to 21 days. Within 3 months, whoever dares to reach out will be chopped off. As time passed, more information was gathered. The Empire of the Sun Never Sets had arrested 2 knights and a shareholder of the airline. Indeed, as speculated, someone had tampered with the plane, and it seemed to be related to the United States. There were still no signs of life around the English Channel. At that time, there were more than 80 passengers on the plane. Including the 13 flight attendants, all of them died. With a twist in the air, 2 people appeared from the sky with a ball of flame. The Empress's entire back was pitch black, and her whole body was bone-chilling. As soon as she appeared, she flew out of the hall with a pitch-black figure in her hand and arrived at the clinic in a flash. Everyone come out. The Empress's bone-chilling voice spread throughout the clinic. A soaring murderous intent alarmed more than half of the capital. Your Majesty. The people who ran out of the clinic in a panic were shocked when they saw the Empress. Most of the Empress's clothes were damaged, and the edges of the damaged clothes were charred as if they had been burned. The Empress's fine black hair also had many burn marks. Zhao Prince Consort, who was being supported by the Empress, had almost no part of his body that was unharmed. He had already fainted and his breathing was weak. Your Majesty, what exactly happened? Save him. The Empress's eyes were red and dark red patterns began to crawl all over her body. If I can't save him, all of you will die. Even now, the Empress still had lingering fears. If she hadn't sensed the great danger and brought Rinpoche out of the plane, she probably wouldn't have survived that powerful explosion. Damn it, damn it, damn it. They all deserve to die. The Empress's murderous intent was like a sharp sword that left scratches on the ground around her as if it had been slashed by an invisible sword. Your Majesty, what happened? One by one, the experts were alarmed by the Empress's aura and appeared in the courtyard of the clinic. They were shocked to see the Empress and Rinpochen being carried in. The Empress glanced at Xenzhe, Tongzhinye, Qinchuan, Tuwan, Xianhua, Zhuyen, Xiongyaohe, and dozens of Cardinal Heaven-level civil and military officials arrived one after another. All of them looked shocked. The Empress was clearly in the palace, so how could she be so seriously injured? Follow me to kill people in a few days. The Empress was furious. She had never suffered such a big loss in her life. Her only thought now was to massacre that country. If it wasn't for the fact that Rinpochen couldn't take too many people with him, she would have led the army to kill them and turn that country into ruins. How dare a bunch of ants? Yes, everyone responded. No one dared to anger the Empress now. They were secretly wondering who could have injured the Empress like this. The Empress stood there and couldn't suppress her anger. The patterns on her body almost floated up. With a wave of her hand, all the experts around her were sent flying, and half of the courtyard of the clinic was turned into ruins. Your Majesty, Zhao Prince Consort's life is not in danger. After the doctor carried Rinpochen in and examined him, someone immediately came to inform the Empress. The Empress stood there coldly without saying a word, and her killing intent didn't ease at all. The doctor who came to inform the Empress broke out in a cold sweat, bowed to the Empress from afar and hurried back. Many of the experts who were sent flying landed outside the courtyard, looked at each other and didn't dare to speak again. The Empress's attack just now was just to vent her anger and no one was injured. However, no one dared to approach her again. They had never seen the Empress so angry before. No one dared to persuade her. The wrath of the Empress would cause blood to flow. After a while, the periphery was surrounded by imperial guards, officials from the Public Order Bureau and the Department of Inspection. Everyone stood far away and quietly waited for the Empress to speak. Even some of the experts in the capital were alarmed. They stood in the distance and looked over, wanting to know what was going on. It wasn't until dawn that the Empress's killing intent gradually subsided. However, she only restrained it within her body. At this time she was like a ferocious beast that could explode at any time. Chapter 11-12. Rinpochen woke up and felt his body. His internal organs and bones were in pain, but it didn't seem to be a big deal. When he opened his eyes, he saw the Empress standing there with a cold expression. There was a flash of joy in her eyes, but the coldness faded a little. She seemed to have thought of something, and her eyes were suddenly filled with murderous intent. Your Majesty, Rinpochen said softly. Then he thought about what happened before and asked with an incredulous expression, were we blown up? The Empress didn't say a word, but the murderous intent in her eyes intensified. A scratch appeared on the wall. Following a series of sizzling sounds, scratches appeared on the wall, the floor and the ceiling. The table, chairs and shelves were all blown up, and only the place where Rinpochen was wasn't damaged at all. Rinpochen was still immersed in his own shock. He had blown up people for half his life, but this time he was blown up? If it weren't for the Empress's quick reaction and timely protection, he would probably have been turned into a box. F***ck. Rinpochen was stunned for a long time before suddenly cursing and jumping out of bed. He then felt as if his body had fallen apart. How dare the people from the empire where the sun never sets? They are simply courting death. Rinpochen's fierce-looking face was full of rage. He was almost put into a box. And it wasn't just him, but also the Empress. Both he and the Empress were blown up. Are you all right, Your Majesty? Rinpochen turned to look at the Empress. He wasn't dead, and with her physical condition she should be fine. However, he still had to ask her to be at ease. Follow me back to the palace, recuperate, and then go kill people, the Empress said through gritted teeth. Let's go. Rinpochen jumped down from the bed naked. His clothes were already prepared beside him. However, he found that there was a large patch of dead skin on his body. After tearing it off, there was new flesh underneath. He cleaned it up before changing into new clothes. When he came out of the room, he saw that half of the doctor's office was in ruins. The officials and guards of the imperial court were standing outside, and there were at least 1,000 people. Do your own things, the Empress said coldly. Your Majesty, who are we going to kill? Qin Chuan stepped forward and cupped his hands. As long as Your Majesty gives the order, the 100,000 aboriginal soldiers will immediately trample it to the ground. Not even a blade of grass will grow. Get lost. The Empress scolded. Qin Xuan didn't get angry even though he was scolded. He just didn't know who His Majesty was going to behead. Why did he get angry when he asked? Ren Baqian nodded at everyone and followed the Empress back to the palace. Ren Baqian accompanied the Empress as they walked around the palace. He felt a lingering fear in his heart. If anything had happened to him and the Empress, even if Hua could secure the throne, there was an 80% chance that the human race would perish when the foreign races came after a decade or two. Although Honeysuckle was extremely talented, he had too little time. Even if Honeysuckle reached the Empress's current level in just over a decade, how could he be a match for the foreign races? It was too dangerous this time. How are your injuries? The Empress asked. It's not a big deal. When Rinpoche woke up, he checked his body. Although he was still injured, it wasn't a big deal. However, even with the strength of his body and the medicine of this world, he still had serious injuries after waking up. It could be seen how serious the injuries he had suffered at that time were. When can we go back? The Empress asked again. How long have you been back? Rinpoche asked. 16 hours. 2 more days. I want to bring some people with me. Rinpoche touched his head and said, with the strength of those people, the 2 of us should be enough. I want them to leave no one alive. The Empress said coldly. Rinpoche smacked his lips. Her Majesty was really angry. However, he was also very angry. How many people were there in the Rising Sun City? Was there even 100 million people? It was impossible to leave no one alive. Rinpoche's current strength was less than 1,500 kilograms, so he couldn't bring too many people with him. However, it shouldn't be a problem to kill all the big and small officials. The number of people to be killed wasn't a small number, so it was good to bring a few people with him. The threat posed by 2 experts and a group of experts couldn't be compared at all. With the gradual increase in the strength of Earth, it was time for him to show his strength again. It had always been him and the Empress showing their faces. If they knew that there were dozens of spirit wheel experts in the martial arts center, would anyone really dare to attack them? Even if something happened to the 2 of them, the remaining people could tear them to pieces. Bring Xianzhou and Lin Xiaola. Then, bring a few people from the Department of Inspection and the Ministry of War. Tai Yin and Wu Cheng from the Department of Inspection are both Cardinal Heaven experts. Qin Xuan Lian Liang from the Department of War, and Yuan Sha from the Department of Cavalry should be enough. If we are still short of manpower, Wuji City still has more than 130 winged cavalry warriors and more than 50 earthwheel experts. Ren Baqin calculated the number of people he would bring this time. He didn't even need to mobilize the winged cavalry warriors and disciples from the martial arts center. By the time they arrived, those who needed to be killed would have already been killed. Alright, that will be the arrangement. The Empress knew that he could only bring a limited number of people and nodded in agreement. When we return, we will be high up in the sky. With your Majesty's help, there will be 9 people. I wonder if you can bring so many people back to the ground? Rinpoche asked again. Rinpoche only knew that the Empress could bring him up in the sky, but he didn't know if she could bring so many people down. In any case, if Qin Xuan and the others fell down, they would be dead. Even if it was the sea below. It wasn't that they couldn't make parachutes, but that it would take time and they would have to return a few days later. However, looking at the Empress's current expression, she didn't want to wait any longer. It's fine. The Empress waved her hand. After the 2 of them discussed, Rinpoche's anger dissipated a little. In any case, they would be able to kill their way back in 2 days. However, the anger in the Empress's heart continued to burn and didn't subside at all. She would probably only be appeased after taking revenge. If Rinpoche didn't wait for revenge overnight, the Empress would take revenge on the spot before she could think clearly. For the next 2 days, even after seeing Hua, the Empress's cold expression didn't ease much. Hua was so scared that he hid far away from her and didn't dare to be naughty for 2 days straight. This child was very talented and had sharp senses. He knew that his biological mother was currently in a rage. If he provoked her again, he wouldn't be able to resolve it with just a round of beatings. He would need at least 2 rounds of beatings. 2 days later, Rinpoche sneaked into Qingxin Palace Hall. The new Qingxin Palace Hall was much bigger than before and it now had a lot more books. The books that he brought back from Earth and the loot from destroying the sects were split into 2 sets. One set was placed in Black Bamboo Academy, and the other was placed in Qingxin Palace Hall. He pushed open the door and saw that Lin Xiaola was still lying on the table drooling. There was also a gurgling sound that sounded like snoring, but was actually coming from her chest. Usually when Lin Xiaola was in a good mood, she would make such a sound. It had great effects on her, such as healing injuries and diseases, and could even promote the growth of her strength. Rinpoche guessed that it was probably through the vibration of her blood and bones, or some kind of vibration of her organs, that this sound could be heard. However, he didn't know which of these two possibilities was the chicken and which was the egg. She still looked like a 17 or 18-year-old girl, delicate and pretty. She wore a blue tube top and a short skirt that revealed her smooth shoulders and soft abdomen. Rinpoche looked at her lying there and couldn't help but think of many things that happened in the past. Then he slapped the back of her head. Lin Xiaola jumped up and slashed with her claws. Whoa, let's go and do something. Rinpoche's arm was scratched, leaving a few white marks. When Lin Xiaola saw that it was Rinpoche, her eyelids drooped again. She looked drowsy and obviously hadn't woken up yet. Are you sleeping more than before? Rinpoche was a little puzzled. In the past, she could still sense it when he pushed the door open. But now she didn't even respond when he pushed the door open. I'm growing. Lin Xiaola yawned. Let's go. He brought Lin Xiaola to the garden and heard the sound of drums and zither coming from inside. The music was intense as if two armies were confronting each other. There was the sound of drums, swords, and horses. It made the scene of a battlefield unconsciously appear in front of their eyes and made their blood boil. When they turned into the garden, they saw the empress leaning on a reclining chair and drinking the wine in her cup. Xanjit, Taiyan, Qin Xuan, and the rest were wearing helmets and armor and standing at the side. Xanjit carried a long sword on her back, Taiyan and the rest were carrying long sabers, Qin Xuan was carrying a long saber, and Lian Liang was actually carrying a mace. The rest of you may leave. The empress waved her hand and dismissed the musicians. How much do all of you weigh? Rinpoche glanced at the crowd. He knew that Xanjit's weapon and armor added up to more than 60 kilograms. The saber weighs 80 kilograms and the armor weighs 130 kilograms, Taiyan said. My saber weighs 173 kilograms, and it's made of meteoric iron. It's indestructible and can break through anything. This armor is called the Mountain Shifter, and it weighs 160 kilograms. Besides Her Majesty, no one can break it. Qin Xuan stroked his beard and boasted. This Luanfang weighs 180 kilograms, and the armor weighs 170 kilograms. Rinpoche listened. Based on the iron prices in Dayo in the past, the armor and weapons that easily weighed more than 100 kilograms were considered priceless. It's too heavy. Take off the armor and weapons, but we can still wear them. Rinpoche calculated in his mind. The few of them looked regretful as it was rare for them to have the opportunity to dress so neatly. Xanjia, you don't have to take it off. It's not that heavy. Rinpoche stopped Xanjia. This bespectacled lady only wore safety pants and a sports vest under her armor. When she didn't have a sports vest, she wrapped her chest with a piece of cloth. Then he swept his gaze across the crowd and took off their armor. Everyone was bare-chested, revealing their dragon-like muscles with a piece of cloth wrapped around their crotch. Two of them didn't even have a piece of cloth wrapped around their crotch. Go back and change your clothes. I'll give you 15 minutes. The empress poured wine into her mouth and continued to pour wine. 15 minutes later, everyone changed into their usual robes and returned. Before we leave, I'll tell you about the situation on the other side. Rinpoche spent an hour explaining the general situation on Earth to everyone, especially reminding them to be on guard against those weapons. Everyone was shocked to find out that they were actually going to another world. It was truly unbelievable. If it wasn't for the fact that the person who said this was Zhao Prince Consort and that the Empress didn't refute him, they wouldn't have believed it. Even so, it took them some time to digest what Rinpoche said. According to Her Highness, the people in that world are weak, but their weapons are powerful. However, the weapons also need to be controlled. Why don't we bring 20,000 soldiers and make it Dayo's territory? Qin Xuan's eyes lit up. Now that the Yun nation had been destroyed, the people in the Ministry of War had no war to fight. They were overjoyed to suddenly discover such a new world. The Empress's eyes flickered. If it weren't for the limited number of people that Rinpoche could bring, she would have been tempted. However, there wasn't much point in thinking about it. She had this idea before, but it was a world away and could only be accessed through Rinpoche. This piece of land wasn't worth much. Instead of thinking about this, it was better to think about the vast land outside the 60,000 mountains. Let's go. The Empress held a bottle of wine in one hand and Rinpoche in the other. Her body was overflowing with murderous intent, and Rinpochen was dragging Xenja Lin Xiaola, Tai Yen, and the others with his other hand. Chapter 11-13. The plane explosion caused a great shock in the world and was on the news of various countries. However, that was all the ordinary people knew. Only the higher-ups of some countries knew through various channels that the two people on the plane were at the center of the incident. Those who heard this news felt pity, indifference, and even contempt. It was simply foolish to want to face an entire country with one person's strength. Even if they took advantage for a while, so what? No matter how strong he was, what could he do? Many things happened in the empire over the past 10 days. In addition to the 2 knights and an airline director, many people were arrested and demoted. In particular, the high-ranking officials, parliamentarians, and military officials of the Eagle faction were suppressed. The explosion of the plane made the royal family of the unsetting Sun Empire furious, especially when some people exposed their close relationship with the United States, which made them even more furious. For a time, the undercurrents in the empire were turbulent. Meanwhile, within China, some people were secretly itching to try. No one could survive an explosion like that. Furthermore, the Rin family possessed too many things that were coveted by others. Although the old man had suppressed all of them, everyone knew that he wouldn't be able to do so for too long. In a few months at most, someone was bound to make a move. As for the United States, they saved the world once again by eliminating the 2 people who had caused great damage to the balance and stability of the world. Although it was a pity that they had lost the things they had, since they couldn't be captured or obtained, they had to be killed. The English Channel, 10,000 meters above the ground. As the air fluctuated, 9 figures appeared in the sky and fell violently. It had to be said that free falling from an altitude of 10,000 meters was a very rare experience. Qin Chuan, Tai Yen, and the others felt the rapid fall and looked down at the sea that was getting closer and closer to them. The Empress didn't stop until she was 1,000 meters above the ground. It was as if she had stepped on an invisible floating object. However, it was only for a short while. Following which, the Empress stomped on the ground every 50 meters to slow everyone down. Every time he released the force, he felt as if his arms were going to break, and he couldn't help but wonder if he should let go and throw them down. However, Lin Xiaola was like an octopus, crawling along his arms to his back. She hugged his chest tightly and screamed, "Ah." One had to know that Lin Xiaola was afraid of water, and the deep blue sea below made her limbs weak. When they were about 100 meters above the surface of the sea, the Empress tapped her feet, and everyone suddenly changed their direction and leaped to one side. The Empress led everyone in the air as if she was pulling a long string of kites. She flew straight toward the cliff in the distance. The narrowest part of the English Channel was only about 30 kilometers wide. This distance was a blink of an eye for everyone. This was a cliff in the middle of the town. Looking down the cliff, one could see many buildings, dams that extended into the sea, towering lighthouses, and cars and pedestrians coming and going. This is another world? Qin Chuan and the others looked around. With their eyesight, although they were far away, they could still see a lot of things, especially the exotic buildings, which made everyone feel very surprised. Lin Xiaola was still lying behind Rinpochen like an octopus, screaming miserably. "Let go." Rinpochen wanted to pull her down, but Lin Xiaola hugged him very tightly. Rinpochen exerted force, and Lin Xiaola came down along with his clothes and pants. The Empress glanced at him with an indifferent expression. Rinpochen rubbed his forehead, put on his pants, and didn't care about the others. He pressed the communication device on his wrist, and an operation interface appeared in the air. "Contact Yang Sr." A moment later, a translucent image appeared in the air. Yang Sun was wearing a shirt, and it seemed like he was in the office. "Mr. Rin, are you okay?" Yang Sun was pleasantly surprised. At the same time, he saw that there seemed to be a lot of people around Rinpochen. Several burly men stood there like a wall and were even more robust than those in the martial arts center. What's this?" Qin Chuan's big face was directly in front of the image, and his big hand touched the air. "I can't touch it." "Get out of the way, you are blocking the camera." Rinpochen took 2 steps away and said with a cold face, "Arrange for someone to pick me up. 9 people, go to the Fog City. I want a few guides, as well as the location of all the high-ranking officials and military bases in the Rising Sun City." Rinpochen was determined. If he didn't demolish the Rising Sun City, he would change his surname to Er Hua. This time, if it weren't for the Empress's quick reaction and his ability to travel between worlds, he would have been put into a box. He didn't care what kind of impact it would have on the world, whether it would cause World War III or any other chain reaction. His only purpose was to demolish the Rising Sun City. Whoever wants me dead, I will let them die first. Looking at Rinpoche's fierce face, Yang Sun was also frightened. Although he didn't know how much damage Rinpoche and the Empress could cause, he could tell from what happened in the Fog City 2 weeks ago. With the strength of these two people, if they simply wanted to destroy, it wouldn't be much worse than a nuclear bomb. Moreover, it wasn't just 2 people. Rinpoche and the Empress had a total of 9 people. Apart from him and the Empress, there were 7 other people. They were definitely experts, and they were far better than those burly men in the martial arts center. This time, something big was going to happen. From the moment Rinpoche and the Empress were attacked, something big was definitely going to happen that would shake the world. Although Yang Sen was frightened, there were still some things he wanted to say. According to the information we received from all kinds of traces, the mastermind of this matter shouldn't be the Rising Sun City. Rinpoche was a little stunned. These days he had been itching to demolish the Rising Sun City. If it wasn't them, then who could it be? It should be done by the United States. Is there anyone from the Rising Sun City involved? Rinpoche asked with an ashen face. After enduring his anger for so many days, he was naturally in a bad mood when he suddenly found out that the culprit was someone else. In any case, he was bombed in the Rising Sun City, and he was thinking about finding trouble with the Rising Sun City first. No matter who was involved from top to bottom, no one would be spared. It seems that a few people were involved, but they have been arrested. As for whether there are fish that escaped the net, I'm not too sure, Yang Sen said. I don't know the details of this matter. How about this? I will get someone to pick you up first. I will report it to the higher-ups and see if there are any other secrets. Okay. Get someone to bring me a set of clothes. Rinpoche sent his location to Yang Sen and hung up. His face was gloomy. Whether they did it or not, they can't get away with it, the Empress said coldly. Whether you did it or not, if I say so, then it's true. Kill them first. If you kill the wrong person, consider yourself unlucky. Rinpoche thought for a while and said, Your Majesty, there's no need to cause too much trouble here. The target is the United States. If we cause too much of a ruckus and alert the United States, it will be difficult to find them later on, Rinpoche said after thinking about it. Of course, this matter didn't need to be too big in terms of the scale of destruction. If the target people were involved, what might happen in a while would be enough to shake the whole world. Your Majesty, we will kill whoever you say. Qin Xuan looked fierce. Although he didn't know what happened, someone actually dared to attack Her Majesty? Let me see if my knife is sharp or not. Come. Miao Shu Wu. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.